Yeah, I mean, that works better. The last time I messed up my own settings because I have these regular Zoom meetings with my disciples. It got messed up. So that's why I asked you to share the link. I would prefer today that Surajit, Rajarshi, Ramachandra speak more than I speak, because I did speak a lot last time.
Right.
And it's very rare to get them all lined up.
Yeah, I think Ram is joining. He just messaged me.
I have just one or two points I would like to make, which never occurred to me about Swami Vivekananda in the past. So I'll make those. And then I would prefer that most of it is answered by. And I also noticed something very interesting. Rajarshi, Surajit, and me all kind of have Calcutta connections. And the Telugu fellow is living now in Bengal.
Yeah.
So now I'm the only odd man. But Surajit is also, part Bihari, part.
Yeah, he is actually
UPI
Pravasi Bangali in that sense.
Yeah.
But another thing is that Rashi and Surajit have access to the Bengali accounts of Swami Vivekananda, which I don't. I mean, I can read Bengali, but with great difficulty, so I cannot read anything complex. So he has a lot of insights from within the culture thing, and I would like those aspects to be brought out, because the Bengali accounts of Swami Vivekananda are very different from the English accounts.
Yeah.
To a great extent.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that the one common thing is that all of us have a Vivekananda Ramakrishna connection. My first while we wait for them to join us, my first exposure was actually there is in Bangalore you have many of these libraries called city center libraries. So these are free libraries where circulating libraries where we can pick up books. You pay a one-time fee and that's it. So it used to be 50 rupees or 40 rupees and you get 3 books at a time. And so I walked into the library. I was probably 14, 15, and there was a guy. I don't know why this person met with me. And he says, "I think you should read this book." It was the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, and he said it will change you. It actually changed. I mean, he was right. So you really don't know how this happened. And the second time is that I didn't know there was in Bangalore there is an ashram called the Vivekananda ashram. It's been renamed as the Ramakrishna ashram. One of the few ashrams that were named after Vivekananda.
Okay.
And it was raining heavily, so I ran into the ashram just to see. And there's on the stone wall there is this plaque that they've put, which says his favorite this one that do this by work or worship or whatever, and the whole idea. Somehow I think he manages to. So that's how it started. In fact, then I started going regularly to the ashram, volunteering there and all of that. And then from there, now I don't. Now, of course, I don't go. So.
What is the YouTube count? I mean, we have very few people here, which is probably good. What is the YouTube count of people watching?
I have to check 1 minute. I shared it on Facebook and tagged all of you.
No, I'm asking how many are watching on YouTube, because I had suggested that since there are limitations for the Zoom chat, that maybe Ramchandra we are getting.
Yeah, I'll just unmute him. There are 6 people right now there.
Only 6 people there. Okay.
I think Sunday morning 9:30 is earliest.
Yeah.
Also most people.
That's a good point.
Most people are like, if we miss it, we can always catch it later.
Yeah.
So.
Pranam Shri Guru.
Sir.
Namaste Rajarshi. Good morning. Suprabhat.
Suprabhat. Namaste. We're waiting for Surajit. Because here I have a limit of only 100. So 4 of us, we have already 4 or 5 of us. So
is this also going through that? I saw some discussions through Safe News also. Is it linked or?
No, he gave me a lot. No, Surajit gave me a lot of ideas.
Okay.
I didn't understand anything of what he said. That's why I said you. So I said you.
No, I doubt you can live stream simultaneously on two separate YouTube channels. You cannot live stream on Tiff News as well as your channel. I doubt that is possible. I mean, I'm sure it is possible, but I doubt they'll allow it.
So I told him I leave it to you. So, but he's not joined us yet.
Just remind him that we are all on.
He saw it.
You can drop a message in WhatsApp.
I actually dropped him. Hi, Gauri, and maybe quite a few joined us here. Actually messaged him when we seen it. Should I try calling him?
I find social media so wonderful for this kind of thing. Otherwise, where else we could get Ramesh, Rajarshi, Ramachandra, Surajit, me talking on Vivekananda. It's just like so wonderful that this is possible.
Absolutely. It allowed us to correct over several years. And
Yes,
then,
I mean,
and then
we are the old guys, no? We grew up in the radio generation. So for us, this is all still magic, like this is like a James Bond movie, you're conferencing with people across the world, it's literally a Bond movie for us.
I just spoke to him. He's coming on board.
He's coming. Okay, no problem. So you can start then. I mean, since
Yeah,
it's already.
I think we'll start. I'm not. One thing I decided is I'm not going to give a lengthy intro on all that. I think
No need for that.
Into the.
No need for that. Everybody knows who's who.
Yeah, everybody knows who. So I'll start with essentially let me set the context. The reason all of us have come on board is that Shri Guru did a talk on Vivekananda. It was and the most of the feedback that we got is it was extremely short. The time was not sufficient. And the chat box simply burnt up with so many questions. Questions kept coming. Then my inbox also got filled with a lot of questions that we thought, okay, so when I reached out to him, he said, let's do something where we can address it, and let's address it with some freedom and not be restricted, and therefore this forum. And then when we thought who are the people whom we should get on board, quickly, interestingly, for all four of us, except Surajit now as R, starts with at least the R kind of thing. So the 4 R's plus the S. So he said, I think we should get on board, and then let's try addressing some of the questions. And then probably, I think the questions also, I think, will lead to some, organic kind of segues where we can talk about things that seem to be impacting our Dharma, Hinduism, and generally the state of and all of those things.
I would suggest that everybody be a little careful about language, because we don't want anything that can get us a strike,
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Say it cleverly.
I don't want my first podcast to be the last one. So.
Yeah, it is an inaugural podcast.
Rather, my first personal podcast to be the last podcast. So, because there I am usually careful. So
it was commented to me that you were very restrained. I was like, yeah, you have to be restrained now on social media.
Yes.
You cannot say what is really in your heart and your mind. So one has to do symbolic things like this.
Do you actually want to tell people why you have the mask on? Or that...
Yeah, this is symbolic of the muffled Hindu voice. This is our reality. So I just want it to be in your face. I want it to be in your face that the Hindu voice is strangled. The Hindu voice is being choked. The Hindu has to filter out what he or she is saying. So I want I want discomfort in people. I want people to be uncomfortable about it. I want them to feel that, okay, this is what has happened. So everybody wants their comfort zone restored by saying, please take it off, please take it off. And I'm like, no, it stays. Because I want you to realize what you are. Kitne pani mein hai, I want you to feel that. Especially, one girl commits suicide because of pressure for conversion, and then we have some silly uproar over dress code. This is the level of priorities we have today.
Right.
Anyways, ठीक है. अब शुरू करो.
So let me start with the first of the questions, so that I'm going to read out the questions, because for some reason I created a PowerPoint and all that, saying I'll share it, but it says for today your screen sharing has been restricted, so I'm not going to fight technology.
No,
So
read the question so that it remains in the record.
Yeah, I think the first question refers to a video that you have where you talked about how Sri Aurobindo, transitioned, or rather, continued the legacy of Vivekananda in a sense. So the question that they're asking is, while that person personally seems to understand what all of this is, but the question is, nobody has touched upon it very deeply in the spiritual perspective. As opposed to, most of these religious organizations seem to end up becoming social service, NGOs, and all that, at least in the public life. If you could talk, so what was it? What was that Shakti that Swami Vivekananda had? I'm just paraphrasing it a little. That enabled him to go much beyond only the limited spiritual sense. I mean, he touched upon multiple walks of life. You can talk about education, you talk about anything. You will find his voice resonating there, or you hear him speak about it. So what is it that he gave to the ancient Dharma and spirituality that all of us, or that you think should be rekindled in a sense? That's the first question. And I'll take
take it. Anybody can take it, no?
Yeah. Rajarshi, you want to start?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll start.
Yeah.
Hello to everybody. So I'll go straight away into the main heart of the question, which is the link between Sri Aurobindo and Swami Vivekananda. It's not that it has not been touched upon. I mean, those who are aware of Sri Aurobindo, have read his writings and hold him in high esteem, are mostly aware of this. Those who are followers of Swami Vivekananda also are kind of aware of this. So basically, the incident that happened, as we get it from Sri Aurobindo's writings, is that he was in the jail due to the Alipur bomb case, where I think he was not the person who was involved. Actually, somebody else was, but they implicated him anyway, because at that time, Aurobindo was one of the most dangerous Indians alive. I mean, that is the British characterization of Aurobindo. Used to be. That's how it used to be. So they thought that this is a good opportunity to get him into jail and put him in a complete isolation. And those in that era, the kind of torture, the isolation, etc., that the British were capable of is quite. I mean, we can understand that there was obviously, when they set a target on an individual, that okay, this is a dangerous individual and he needs to be taken out of the equation. So they will use the full might of their techniques and whatever they have to neutralize him in whatever way possible. So it is in that environment that Sri Aurobindo, when he went to jail, he actually took along with him only one text, that is the Bhagavad-Gita, which he used to study. And he has been studying that for more than a decade, to be honest, what we get from his writings. And he had been practicing his various kinds of yoga, pranayam, and a couple of other things. I mean, he was already in the regime of doing at least 5 hours of pranayam daily, apart from his other activities as an editor, as inspiring people, then doing work with the Anushilan Samiti and, various other things. So in the jail, in the environment that he was deprived of, so it was I think it was a solitary confinement. So basically you don't have any light, you can't meet anybody, you may get a food once a day, something like that. In that environment, he, because there was nothing else to do, so he used to practice his yoga, he was doing. And there he had a vision, if I recall correctly, there was a vision where he felt Swami Vivekananda appeared in the jail for a period of about, I think, a week or something like that, used to appear to him. Yeah, I think fortnight, correct. And used to direct him spiritually, in the sense that there are certain more zones of the human mind beyond the rational mind, which later Sri Aurobindo developed into the idea of the various kinds of the luminous mind, the intuitive mind, and the higher mind, the various other terminologies that he uses. But in a way, briefly put, it was Vivekananda who directed him towards that goal, towards the direction that he must explore spiritually and understand better and develop. So that is the first primary connection, spiritual connection, you may say, that was there. Apart from that, we already see that Swami Vivekananda did play a very strong influence, not only on Aurobindo Ghosh. I'm using the term Aurobindo Ghosh because he had not taken the name Sri Aurobindo at that time. Okay, he took it afterwards because he had certain more experiences. Then he completely took to the spiritual the realm and left all revolutionary activity aside and political activity. So he used to be at that time known as Aurobindo Ghosh. So that's why I use that term, but it's Sri Aurobindo for us as we know him. He already had a very deep reverence for Swami Vivekananda because Vivekananda's impact was tremendous. I mean, after specifically Vivekananda had left his body, we already know and we see that a large bunch of the revolutionaries were completely inspired by Vivekananda. That is, in fact, he's the kind of man, if we read his last days of Vivekananda, we see that when he was alive, perhaps towards the end, so there was a mass connection that was there, but the certain elite sections of Hindu society, and specifically Bengali society, were not in favor of Swami Vivekananda because they used to look at him also as somebody who is changing, certain traditionally accepted ideas and practices, and he's not following them exactly to the T. So they had certain opposition towards him to the extent that after his death, I think this we find in one of the Bengali books on Swami Vivekananda. So there was an invitation sent out to prominent Hindus, including those who were in the already, from today's perspective, you would say that deeply colonized prominent Hindus. So they were in elite positions in society at that time, comparatively elite, like whatever elite Indian could achieve. Many of them refused to, so they had no issues with a certain degree of collaboration with the British, but at the same time, in their personal practices, they used to consider themselves as very deeply religious and things like that. They had certain reservations in attending the funeral and the memorial services of Swami Vivekananda because they used to think that this man has made certain changes or he did not follow the caste system to the extent that it was followed at the time. Certain these kind of ideas were there. It is only later on when very prominent people who had certain degree of influence and people who were followed by other average people, they started eulogizing Swami Vivekananda, that we find that everybody became very keen that, okay, this is, he is a man who is very different. So in that sense, by the time Sri Aurobindo was there and the other revolutionaries were there, because initially Sri Aurobindo had a very strong political and revolutionary mind. I mean, he was one of those people who was keen that India should get the freedom, not through the pacifist method, but through the more aggressive, you should get whatever extreme measures need to be taken, must be taken because of that viewpoint. So those people were very highly influenced by Swami Vivekananda anyway. So they used to look at him as a guide, as an inspiration, as a figure who gave a strong reason for connecting the older civilizational ethos along with what is happening politically at this moment. So it's kind of a man who certainly broadens your vision. It's not just, I have to just get out of the British. Why I have to get out of the British? Because I have a civilization that is so old, that is so powerful, that there's no reason to feel inferior to the West. So all these things taken together, I think that's how, that was in fact the first spiritual contact that Sri Aurobindo had with Swami Vivekananda. And later on, Sri Aurobindo then, as he himself did more practices and he developed himself, he took those ideas, the first glimpse that Vivekananda showed him in the jail, in Alipur jail, and he developed them into his own, understanding of spirituality, and he wrote about it in books. That's all I would put for this, this connection. And anybody else wants to add something?
Surajit also has joined us. Did you get the question? Namaste. Did you?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
You
Namaskar to everybody. Yes, I in fact went through the questions on the first instance itself, and then again I revised them. Yes.
Yeah, no, the question we had, and I would
No, I missed that. I missed
right,
that.
right. So I'll perhaps go to Ram because he's already listened to the question. I'll go to Ram, and then because one of the things that Shri Guru said is that he would like all of you to speak, and he would like to, because he's done his a lot of speaking. He said he talked quite a lot during the first one. So I'll go to Ram, and then I'll come back to the question to you.
Okay.
So, if you may allow me a little time, I'll probably take a little broader sweep on this. What I think Rajarshi has already given a wonderful base of, especially in the interface and coming together of these mighty rishis and the shaktis that shape our destiny and that will inevitably shape our destiny in the future. That is Sri Aurobindo and great Swami Vivekananda. So, for also benefit of Surajit ji, who's just joined us right now. So we were discussing, and Ramesh's first initial discussion point was what was especially the spiritual nature of the interaction that took place and shaped the interface between Swami Vivekananda and Sri Aurobindo. And Rajarshi wonderfully, recollected the solitary isolation of Sri Aurobindo in the Alipur jail and what it led to, and what are the higher states of consciousness or the newer realms that were shown as a pathway for Sri Aurobindo by Swami Vivekananda himself. I would just like to add one very interesting.
Just one clarification needed. Are we going sequentially about his life or just randomly here and there? Because
yeah, I think what the context is that we're taking some of the questions that came up during the conversation one.
okay.
And the idea is also, if as we discuss the questions, can we also laterally make some segues into how these questions also impact the broader framework of Hinduism and all of those things.
We haven't dealt with Narendranath Datta so far, right?
No, we haven't.
Okay. All right.
So I would like to take that reflection from Rajarshi further and add some of my thoughts. And one interesting bit, it's more of an interesting bit, is Sri Aurobindo mentions that the knowledge that was imparted to him by Swami Vivekananda's presence in the solitary confinement, that Swamiji himself did not have or express it when he was in his body. And so this gives us a little more stronger insight into the dynamics and the actions of the great Shaktis like this, that when they are not in body, their Shakti just unfurls even more, you see. And the kind of penetration, the kind of impact they tend to have. And we have this very constricted vision of gurus. We do not really see, they are not humans anymore. They are not individuals confined to their siddhis have led them to expand in the subtle form and the subtle nature in a way that's the reason. With that conviction, I can very strongly say that their forces and their inspirations will continue to shape our destinies and fate, no matter how reluctant we are. So this is an important thing to remember and register, that Swami Vivekananda, the knowledge that he imparted to Sri Aurobindo at that point in time in solitary confinement, is something that was not displayed by him while he was in his physical body. I would also like to take this as a broad sweep in trying to set forth. Sri Aurobindo simply said that the only politics that is relevant to India is that of Sanatan Dharma. Nothing, no left, right, center about it. And this has to be clearly seen as a source of inspiration, as a connectivity and a continued thought of Swami Vivekananda, and nothing else but that. This is an extremely important aspect, and I see there are 3-4 important facets of Swamiji's works. As a child, or as anybody, or even as an adult who's filled with inferiority complex about one's own culture, which is likely our secular education imparts us so effortlessly that we take the pills of the secular education and we simply turn into inferiority complex about our own culture, our own Shakti. Swamiji exactly stands opposing to that. He is everything that is opposite to this aspect. He is self-confidence personified. Even astrologically, you look at his chart, sun becomes the most strongest. He is like the blazing sun in the sky. Very interestingly, Sri Aurobindo also has the same feature, the blazing sun and the Vedic knowledge and all that. These are not just some metaphorical, convenient for conversation platitudes. These have very clear implications. And as a child, even for me personally, when I took up, the first thing is this is the most strongest vaccine and immunity factor, that is Swamiji's works and the literature that anybody comes across, that we enter into the domain of reflecting upon our own culture and all of that, apart from childhood stories and all of that. But when we have to look at ourselves in the mirror, it has to be Swami Vivekananda's coating on the mirror. And that only will make us give a sense of self-confidence, which is not misplaced or which is not shallow self-confidence. Why I try to say this is that he brings along with him another dimension of what I call myness. He is the one on the greatest platforms across the globe, whenever he represented India and its culture and Sanatan Dharma and Hinduism, he spoke always about it as myness, my culture, my nation, my desha, everything on that. And this is an extremely important aspect where we are so reluctant now to embrace our own roots. And this becomes an important facet. And another important facet is the urgency that he brought to the aspect of and dimensions of poverty and all of this, and where he gave a sense of direction in terms of empowerment and rebuilding the nation, right? All of this he did on the basis of the spiritual basis, which is he did not give it just a NGO twist to this or seva aspect, nor this minus was reduced to some sort of parochialism or territorialism or some shallowness of jingoism of patriotism, a jingoistic patriotism or anything. All this was grounded on a larger framework and larger basis of spiritual truth of this culture and this nation. And this he has emphasized very strongly. Like many of us, we still try to wrestle out what are the divisions that does not allow a Hindu unity, Hindu cohesiveness and all of that. The same questions prevailed even then for Sri Aurobindo and Swami Vivekananda. They were also pretty much, they took a stance either about caste or either about sectarianism in a similar lines, and you would see the same thoughts of Swami Vivekananda flow in a way as an inspiration even in Sri Aurobindo's writings on these aspects. So this is the strength on the grounds of a new spiritual strength, which is not saying erase all diversity and pluralism and try to build some sort of a new uniformity which is absolutely bereft of our spiritual Shakti. But they have come with the solutions and propositions which are new in its avatar for the contemporary challenges we have to overcome and transcend the limitations of, be it the caste or be it only I'm saying transcend the limitations of, by virtue of, by making this statement, neither I am critiquing those systems in themselves. That is a totally different perspective that I'm not getting into it, but they have identified these divisions do weaken us. So how do we propose a new platform and a new synthesis on the grounds with which we can pursue our spiritual goals, which has to be the source for our political goals, our other dharmic goals, and everything else that needs to flow from this. And one of that beautifully always Shri Guru always points out is that culture, politics, all of this has to be the downstream of the spiritual strength. So that is a continuation that Sri Aurobindo had with Swami Vivekananda, and Sri Aurobindo in his integral Purna Yoga makes writings about politics and culture as part of integral sadhana. It was not some sort of a commentary that he was making by sitting in some marginal place about what is happening in India. For him, the writings were nothing but flowing down of Shakti from the highest planes of intuition. And he expressed even about culture, and he made a lot of propositions which are extremely relevant now. And there is a lot of relevance of imprint of Swami Vivekananda Shakti on this. So those are my thoughts.
Oh, I think
Before Surajit says, could I just add one small thing about the incident in Alipur jail? At the end of the 14 days, Sri Aurobindo reports that Vivekananda said, "In the voice of a God." I remember that phrase very, very, very clearly. He said, in the voice of a God, that if India holds fast to Sanatana Dharma, it will flourish. If it abandons its Sanatana Dharma or weakens it, it will be destroyed. He actually clearly said that. I think he could see all the work nonsense of today because he was no longer limited by his body. And the other thing about the sun, he said that in Vivekananda's chat, there is a sun and also in Sri Aurobindo's. Let me say quickly a small incident of my childhood. Not my childhood, I was a young man. I met an old lady who had met Swami Vivekananda. And I asked her, what was Swamiji like? And she was struggling to express it. And finally she said, Surjo ke dekhecho, have you seen the sun? So, you know, that evident radiance in the man was always clear. You know, it was always a very integral part of who he used to be. Okay, I think Surajit, Narendranath Datta, that I think we didn't cover.
Yeah, but just before Surajit comes in, two things. One, the thing about, just wanted to say, Rajarshi touched about the prison and, you know, the visitations that Aurobindo had and how that shaped his own thinking. And I think Ram also made that crucial point about the vaccination. I think one of the reasons, you know, all of us are here is that, you know, I myself got an early vaccination dose. I was, before, you know, Surajit and Ram had joined, I was telling both Rajarshi and Shri Guru that, you know, I got it at about 11, 12 years. Otherwise, I would have also been lost mostly to the woke crowd right now. So I'm going to come to the same question. I think Rajarshi had something. You had an interjection.
Yeah, I just want to just quickly, I'll add 2 minutes. One thing just came up in my mind while I was listening to Ram. There's another incident that normally we forget to mention. So Sri Aurobindo and Swami Vivekananda obviously had this connection in the sense of the spiritual contact in the Alipur jail that was there. But there is another very, very interesting thing which is not easily apparent unless you read their biographies properly. So Swami Vivekananda's last day, in fact, there is a fantastic Bengali book. I don't know if it's translated. The Monk as a Man. Something like that.
I think Shankar, no, right?
Shankar, yes.
Yeah,
it's a very interesting book. Lot of tidbits about Swami Vivekananda's nature, his character, things.
Continue, Rajarshi.
Yes.
I think it will be useful for the people also. I think
yes, exactly. Yeah, so. This is the book. This is a very, very beautiful book. So one of the things is on the last day of his life, Swami Vivekananda, by the way, Swami Vivekananda, I believe personally, it's my conviction that he definitely had what we call, you know, various kinds of strange and we often add the supernatural element to spirituality, and there's nothing wrong in that. He had all those things, but he used to keep it curbed so that he had a very clear goal that he wanted to project spirituality, Adhyatma and Dharma in a different light together. So he had already told that he'll be leaving his body on this specific date and things like that. So on the day he left his body in the morning, he was taking a class, a grammar class, and he was discussing a few, that's the name of the book. He was discussing a few parts of the Yajurveda with a student. So he had picked up the Yajurveda, he was discussing, taking up a line, 1 or 2 lines, and then he was, you know, translating them. And he was also checking the bhashyas of Shayanacharya and others, and the great commentators that we had. And he makes a very interesting point at the time. Now, we, what we get from Vivekananda, we know that he is the kind of man, if he thinks that this is right, he feels this is right or he is wrong, he's the last person to hold it back out of, anything else. He will just blurt it out, that kind of a thing. So he tells the student there, very interestingly, that the commentary that is present for this specific verse of the Yajurveda is not up to the mark, or rather it's more, it has a certain orientation, which is not in line with the Vedantic orientation, because he himself was a sort of a Vedantin in his own way. So this statement is appreciable if you understand, if you have just a basic idea that, the Vedic interpretation of the Samhitas, there's a specific pattern. So they have an orientation with respect to the Kriya, the actions that have to be done, things like that. I mean, I'm not going to the complexities and the details of it, but Vivekananda felt that some of the verses in the Vedas can have a different spiritual orientation and meaning, or a more Vedantic orientation. That was his idea. But this conversation actually was recorded on the very last day of his life. In the morning, he takes this class, afternoon, leaves. Sri Aurobindo is the one person we find afterwards who actually does a certain amount of work, not too detailed, but at least with the Rig Veda, he actually takes it up and he tries to give a spiritual interpretation to the Rig Veda, at least some verses of the Veda, which I believe is sort of unique in the last few centuries, because most of the traditional idea is that there is the Vedas and there's the commentary. So you take the commentary, and then as the actions are enjoined in the Vedas, as things have to be done, so you follow it accordingly. This angle that the Vedic verses can also perhaps have a Vedantic interpretation, this was actually attempted by Sri Aurobindo. So I find this interesting that here is Vivekananda who says at the very last day of his life that, we need to have maybe some of the Vedic verses needs a different kind of outlook to understand them instead of the traditional way. And here we have Aurobindo, Sri Aurobindo eventually, who actually does some work on that line. I'm not saying it's a complete work. It's still it was at a preliminary level, and perhaps later on something may come out of that. But I find this connection very interesting. So I thought I'll just point it out.
As I get Surajit to address this question, I'll also append another question to what he says, so that leads into the next to this one. I think the second question is about, particularly because we spoke so much about the woke, the second question that I thought is about the woke. It says in today's India, where a lot of liberal woke people banish Hinduism and Sanatana Dharma by citing so-called constitutional secularism. How can we view Vivekananda's statement? I think this is something that's consistently, comes up, and I think it's important to take up that all religions are the same. Jesus, Prophet, and Moses are as divine as Ramakrishna. Because the questioner says, in the world today, we don't see that all religions treat Hinduism with the same respect that our saints ask us to give. So I made a note saying that I don't think SV ever said that all religions. He simply stated that all religions are true, in that they lead to the same end goal, perhaps. But I'm sure, even as Surajit addresses the first part of it, I want him to also unpack this part of it a little bit, so that the others also can take it from there.
Thank you, Ramesh. I think we may deal separately with a section on Swami Vivekananda's take on Christianity. There, this particular issue can be dealt with in details, especially his treatises, so to speak, on Jesus Christ. I think while we keep dissing the Western education, we cannot completely dismiss the exposure that both Swami Vivekananda and Sri Aurobindo had to Western education, which helped them articulate their thoughts in a manner that would also make sense to the Western audience, and at the same time address a large section of our youth who do not understand other forms of articulation. So you would see, especially in different conversations, which sometimes read like argumentative, that Swami Vivekananda had with different interlocutors in India and overseas, that he uses such words that would connect to the Western crowd. And his address at Chicago onwards, it has always been like that. So there are two components in a personality like Swami Vivekananda or Sri Aurobindo. One is the spiritual component, of course, which is the foremost. And, the lesson for the youth from these two personalities is that, especially, I would go a step down further from youth, I would say adolescents, because some people just refuse to grow beyond that age. A lot of people, what you call woke, they are basically adolescents who have not grown. So these adolescent people have a natural tendency of questioning things, which is healthy. And Narendranath Datta also questioned things. And Ramakrishna Paramahansa was not the first influence in his life. Rohit ji has already spoken about his Brahmo background. To elaborate on that, it is a bit nuanced. because there was a faction of Brahmo Samaj, which Keshav Chandra Sen had founded, and it was called Nabobidhan. And then, that kind of cult came to be known as Sadharan Brahmo Samaj, which was a faction of the overall community of Brahmo Samajis there. That was one set of influences. The other set was Devendranath Thakur. He also had influenced Narendranath. And then, when we talk about adolescents, they believe that to understand and appreciate spirituality, debate is enough. It is not. It does not even, skim through the surface, because it is, after all, an experience, and an experience which not everybody has the capability of transmitting from one individual to another. So in a debating format, let's say that between Bertrand Russell and Father Copplestone, neither side would ever experience what the person is trying to get at, which is why you would see that any debate between a believer and an atheist is fruitless. It's a fruitless exercise. It will never reach any conclusion, because what the believer is trying to convey is not getting into the head of the atheist, because that is, merely through words, it does not work. What we see in both Swami Vivekananda's case and Sri Aurobindo's case is that they had a kind of aura which influenced people. You would have experienced in real life that if the same thing is said to you by two different people, it has different impacts. It does not always, maybe the two individuals say the same thing, it does not carry the same impact. But while, his background also at the Presidency College as a brilliant student helped, his studies of philosophies and comparative religion, etc., helped him a lot. But there were certain things that if Swami Vivekananda were to tell the people of today, and if we try to do the same, we cannot replicate it. We cannot have the same impact on the audience. So that is something rationalists may call it mass hysteria or mass hypnotism. But again, that is getting into trying to straitjacket things which are rather incomprehensible for the rationalist crowd. So then, what your specific question was the transition phase, right? The transition phase between Vivekananda and Aurobindo. The
influence that Aurobindo, Vivekananda had on Aurobindo himself.
Right.
In the sense that the question being that Vivekananda continued what Aurobindo had.
Right.
Aurobindo continued what Vivekananda had started.
So as we know that Aurobindo Ghosh used to be a revolutionary, not just a freedom fighter from the non-violent sect or cult, as he was not from the Gandhian cult. So an anecdote of several British officers and their Indian subordinates from the police department would help here. It was reported by several British officers and their subordinates during raids into the houses of different freedom fighters that they would often find a portrait of Swami Vivekananda at these houses. And initially they believed that he was the master kingpin behind all this conspiracy against the British Empire. So who is this guy? We got to get hold of him. This seems to be the head of quote unquote these terrorists or organization, whatever. Terrorists is how freedom fighters, especially revolutionaries, used to be seen as by the British Empire.
Even
So-
Netaji was called it. So,
yes. So Subhash Bose, Bhagat Singh, they were all terrorists in the eyes of the British. But anyway, and the mastermind was Swami Vivekananda, because either physically through a portrait or through their speeches, through what they said during the police interrogation, quite a few of them named Swami Vivekananda. And so that inspiration lived on even after the body of Swami Vivekananda was no longer there. So because we are talking about a phase of contemporary Indian history where the freedom fight had not yet started. When Swamiji passed away, the freedom fight has not yet taken off. So we are seeing that it sustained that feeling, that message of Swamiji sustained for about 2 to 3 decades, and then they resurfaced in the form of revolutionary ideas in some of the freedom fighters. So there is no continuity there as far as a large chunk of freedom fighters who came from England after studying Barrett law was concerned, because after the failure of 1857, the mutiny of 1857, it was a very long, dull period of no action against the British. But then, it suddenly revived, and a lot of them, a lot of freedom fighters swore by Swami Vivekananda. Now, what I also see necessary in the enlightenment of Sri Aurobindo is the fact that the jail term served the purpose of the cocoon of a caterpillar, transforming it into a butterfly. That is one phase which, in some or the other way, must always arrive in one's life for the transformation. Unless that happens, something must change, and the circumstances, your circumstances, must facilitate that process. It is not something, while we keep trying, and I think long ago Rajarshi as well as Rohit ji has said this, that spirituality cannot be a mass movement. It can only be an individual pursuit. So in the same jail, from the same jail, not everybody came out as Sri Aurobindo. One of the guys did. Only one out of so many things. There are other people who were sent to solitary confinement. It did not happen to them. So it is an individual pursuit, but of course we can spread the awareness as a mass movement. That does not mean that the evolution, the spiritual evolution of every individual will be the same. Some will simply refuse to evolve. There are a lot of people who are so inert to this perceptibility that it will never happen to them. And it is not just those who are argumentative, but it is also people who are just plain dumb. They do not have the faculty faculty for, I would say, to use a scientific term, extrasensory perception. This extrasensory perception has to be very keen in an individual, and that is one of the prerequisites for him to evolve as a soul. This is something that we found in Swami Vivekananda. We also found them constantly questioning not just others, but also their own set beliefs, until they finally arrived at a position where they held on to that position subsequently. So this thing, I think, was very important. And even to this day, post-independence, in the modern lexicon or in modern politics, you would see this invocation of Swami Vivekananda time and again, because there is a lateral horizontal progression in this, and there is also a vertical progression in this. In the lateral horizontal progression, we see a connection between the West and the East in Swami Vivekananda's discourses, which makes it extremely difficult for any person of any belief system to dismiss him outright. So even a politician realizes that when he invokes Swami Vivekananda, it becomes very uneasy for the opposition to raise a protest, to raise an objection. And I believe this is one of the reasons that the BJP raises Swami Vivekananda's name once in a while, because the Congress and other parties finds it very difficult to contradict them when they talk about Swami Vivekananda. It's easy to, politically easy at least, to counter you when you are talking about Savarkar. It is very tricky if you praise Swami Vivekananda and your political opponent objects to it. So that is the horizontal progression, and then there is vertical progression, which is of course of spirituality, which is beyond politics. Politicians cannot handle that. That is where, when you are dealing with non-believers, that is when you are dealing with skeptics, this is what will help. You should look at the way the absence of belief is dealt with. For instance, I think that incident was from Kerala, where the king of Travancore, I think, his Swami Vivekananda's interaction, who had asked, what was the significance or importance or relevance of idols, murtis. And
that was in Rajasthan.
Rajasthan, right.
Yes.
Some princely state. I'm forgetting the, yes.
Rajasthan.
Right. So he asked that prince to smash the portrait of his father on the ground and step on it. So this is the and then you realize the importance of image, what importance imagery holds. But that is not everything that there is to a murti, but that was his communication skill at work. Which is why I say that even the knowledge of the West helps you in choosing the particular expression for articulation that will work with a given interlocutor. Not every kind of teaching works with every student. So that is something that he realized. I would say that the initial speeches of Sri Aurobindo, once he came out of jail, some of them were so profound that even when he was speaking to a small crowd, I would say it was overwhelming. And this is something which I did not find in Swami Vivekananda's entire short life. That was, which is that reading paragraphs which are difficult to comprehend, or which are, I'm talking about masses. I'm not talking about students who are already beyond a certain stage. So this is of course a difference that I find between Swami Vivekananda and Sri Aurobindo, that Sri Aurobindo, while talking to a crowd, may sometimes not be conscious of the fact that not everybody there is able to grasp what he's saying. So, even when he speaks about his fleeting experiences with different deities. I'm talking about Sri Aurobindo. And mind you, even Swami Vivekananda, much before he had become a Swami, despite his Brahmo roots, Brahmo background, used to meditate on 3 or 4 Hindu deities. So it was not totally Nirakara Brahma for him. It was Sagun as much as Nirgun. But in the case of Sri Aurobindo, he makes certain speeches after his emergence from jail, which are not for the masses. They are not for the masses. You need to have studied and experienced up to a certain level to be able to appreciate what Sri Aurobindo is getting at. And then it remains very, very steady throughout Sri Aurobindo's life. It is not a constant upward graph and then a plateau, as in the case of Swami Vivekananda. That is, of course, a difference that I find in the two lives. And then this is what I would like to say in the first round.
I must also add that we are about 50 minutes into the discussion and we've addressed one question. So. just a moderator's interjection. So no, I wanted to step in each time, but Surajit was in such flow that I said, okay, no, it's not the time to come in. So
okay, sorry, did I consume
no, I'm just joking. So,
when you get people who are just bursting with knowledge, is going to happen. From the beginning, this is going to happen.
No, I'm just saying.
Get everybody on speaking on Vivekananda is more important than ticking off the questions.
Correct, absolutely. No. The reason I did not stop is because there's a comment out there on YouTube, because there are more people watching us on YouTube than here, which says that brilliantly articulated Surajit Ji. So, it's just that
just a query or request, Ramesh. Look, this format that is Zoom looks very much like an office conference. Could you make it look more like TV?
I've actually for me, I can see only the 4 of you, or I can't see anybody else. You just have to go to the top screen which says view and then click on speaker. And then pin the 4 speakers, then it becomes easy. It looks like we are talking to each other. So,
okay.
And all the others, get fixed onto a panel on top. There is somebody who's saying StreamYard is better. So that's Surajit 1, Ramesh 0. So, so should we address the next question? This question that I did slip in earlier, but about this, about this constant thing about, how Vivekananda talked about Christianity and other religions, his apparent love for Christianity, Jesus and Muhammad, about all religions being equal. When actually he said all religions are true, meaning all of them lead to the final end goal might be the same. And also about when other religions do not treat the Hindus with the same respect that we are advised to give, then where is the logic of this one? And I think within the same question also, what is slipped in is the fact that the Ramakrishna Mutt itself seems to be that's what the questioner says, seems to be catering to the requirements of the work. This is I think all of us know this keeps coming up in social media as well. So perhaps we need to address it. So,
especially the December 25th puja.
Right. The December, every time December 24th onwards, you'll have a lot of
we have people losing their mind over that.
You want to start with that?
I'll just quickly say, because I don't want to take up time. See, one of the reasons why they have this sentiment for December 25th was that the day they took sannyasa was December 25th. After they took sannyasa, one of them remembered that it was December 25th. So it was a date of very great significance to them. Vivekananda used to go around with two books. One was Bhagavad-Gita, one was Imitation of Christ,
Right.
which he found to be a very, very spiritual. And I myself think it is one of the greatest spiritual books ever written. So there was a little tendency at that time to think of these things in a Western, if you look at the English that they used to use, even Aurobindo is guilty of this. It was very biblical English,
Yes.
They would
Yes.
write
Correct.
in
Ah.
cadences and those nuances and those rhythms of the
Right.
King James,
Ah.
the King James version of English, So it was just part of the education. It was part of the mindset.
And peppered with the Lord
And-
and all of those things. Yeah.
Yeah,
The
and as
Almighty.
Rajarshi has pointed out, I would actually like Rajarshi to take this because he has pointed out that no spiritual organization is going to alter something done by the founder.
Right.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
but the so-called deference to the alien faith is not so true because he's also the guy who picked up that missionary abusing Hinduism and dangled him over the side of the ship. If you keep this up, I'll drop you into the water. So, it's not. And he's also the guy who very famously said, we must oppose conversion because every Hindu who goes out of the fold is not only one Hindu the less, but one enemy the more.
Right.
Yes.
So, after that clarity, what I myself don't like what happened on December 25th, but I understand we have to suck it up. It's not going to change. But I would rather that Rajarshi answers that because he has very good nuance on that.
Yeah. In fact, this question exactly, I would like to start with the first thing that you ended with, that statement. In fact, it was just before Swami Vivekananda's death, I think a year or so, maybe a year or 2 years before that, when his interview was taken in Prabuddha Bharat, which is the official publication of the Ramakrishna Math. And the flow of the conversation, in fact, the whole interview is fantastic. So they go into questions of history, and he mentions that, okay, so according to some Islamic texts, when they first came to India, there was about this million amount of people. And then after a few centuries, the amount comes down and various things. So he goes into certain discussions about conversions. And he, in fact, he uses a specific term. Now, it could be because the English that was used at that era was slightly different from what we used. So he used to refer in that interview to people who have converted as perverts. Okay, it's a perversion of religion that has happened. That is why these people have converted. And this perversion is happening either through inducement or through the soul. Now, and then in the flow of that, he mentions that every man who gets out of the Hindu fold is not only a man less, but an enemy more. I don't think there is a more categorical, more brilliant, statement in this regard, because indeed what we have seen, and history is evident in this, that as conversions increase, initially you may be somebody may be converting for whatever reason, but eventually when a critical mass is assumed over centuries of a new religion or faith or something, automatically it ends up causing some form of it. It acts like like a disease, like a virus that attacks the main body of the religion, which is Sanatana Dharma, which is connected to this land, and we see the consequences of it. I mean, we have seen it innumerable number of times. There is hardly any, it's surprising if somebody gets surprised by listening to this fact. That means they're not paying attention to reality. So this is not only not surprising, but this is one of the most brilliant statements I feel that Swamiji made. And this is also a statement that he made just about a year or so before his death. So it is not like, you cannot put it that, okay, he was young and he was hot-blooded and he said something like that, and then later on tomorrow he says that, no, we are all the same. No, he is saying something that is at the maximum level of maturity that he attained, an intellectual maturity. Let's not talk about the spiritual aspect, through his interactions with people, through his reading of people. So it's a very standard thing that as you go about life, as you read more, as you interact, as you see things, your opinions also get shaped. They get nuanced. So here is Swami Vivekananda, and his last statement is this, that anybody who comes out of the Hindu fold is turning to be an enemy eventually. That much is certain. Now, there's a second point that's very important to remember, the context, the times when Vivekananda was he lived. We were at a position at the time where Calcutta and Bengal was perhaps the most strongest epicenter of Christian conversion. this was like, the British Empire had its capital there. Missionaries used to pour their money. There was one after the other. All sorts of people used to come, and they had this clear aim that, okay, let's also project that instances of Dharma. Everything is backward. It's more pagan. It's heathen. You need to get out of that. The more advanced form of religion is the Western religion, the Christian religion, and things like that. And they also had that, the colonizers' attitude that, see, we are dominant over you, so obviously our religion and culture is better than yours. So that environment was very much present at that time. There were people from middle-class families and higher middle-class families who used to convert to Christianity. Okay, so it's not like that was not the era where what we use the term like, somebody converts out of some kind of gift or something that is given to them and they convert. No, that was a period when people who are middle class Hindus and higher middle class Hindus used to convert. And for two specific reasons, they thought that, okay, it was an aspirational conversion. Aspirational, you convert to their religion, so you are closer to them. And you are closer to them means you get more benefits out of them, and you are separate from the masses. You are better than the masses. A sense of elitism, colonialism, and conversion all were mixed together into this heady cocktail, and there were a large number of middle class people used to convert. It is this crowd, this conversion, which was put to an end effectively by Swami Vivekananda. And this is not my statement at all. I'm not, you may call me that I'm biased or something. No, this is exactly what S.R. Goel writes. And he's one of the most, I don't think he needs any introduction that, the kind of research and authenticity and the painstaking details into which he has gone in these aspects of history. And he says that very clearly that if not for Swami Vivekananda, the middle class of India would have converted to Christianity long back. He was the one who stopped it. And how did he stop it? It's the most interesting thing. He doesn't stop it by constantly every other day coming into a pulpit and saying, okay, everything about the Christians are wrong. Let's throw their book. Yeah, if the occasion arises, there are places where he strongly criticizes Christianity. And he calls it, various types of things. And he mentions that when he was in the West, the Christian, the priests and the fathers of the various denominations, they used to even try and poison him because they thought that his influence was so strong that people are getting out of their religion and, developing a strange fascination and interest for a very pagan religion. He mentions all that. But what essentially he does is that he suddenly makes a whole nation who's psychologically defeated suddenly feel proud about who you are. You feel proud about your culture, about your religion, that, you have a far superior base foundation and a much ancient foundation, etc. And the moment you start feeling confident about who you are, your religion, your identity, the middle class conversion to Christianity immediately came to an end. What was left after that, so the missionaries and all, they started then targeting people who are economically disadvantaged, whether they're tribals or in rural areas, and you give them some gifts or this or that, or you pay them some money so that they can convert. So that conversion started after Swami Vivekananda. So he has to be credited as a man who effectively, by some peculiar, and this is the greatness of his character. There's no other way I can describe it. It's not that he's doing some magic and he's chanting a mantra, he's doing a of his thumb and then everything changes. No, Swami Vivekananda becomes Swami Vivekananda as Swami Vivekananda exists, and that itself puts an end to Christian conversion from the middle class Hindu community. That's the net result of that man's life. And he didn't even have to put in much of an effort. He didn't have to every day come and say that, oh, I hate that, you worship this and you worship that, etc. He was in fact very well versed in their scriptures also. But at the same time, his conversations is to be, I find, a certain degree of nuance in it. So he's not saying that the religion is wrong or there is no spiritual merit in it. He's saying that there is some good in that, but there is also a lot of things that are problematic. And history says that because of these problems, you end up creating more difficulties, more negative impact overall, etc., etc. So net result is saying that if you take the whole statement, everything that is saying in right context, you say that no, there is no need to convert to that religion. It's by and large inferior to what we already have. So what we have already takes in elements from there and then sublimates it and makes it into much greater. And this is the same criticism he has even for Islam. So he is one of the first individuals, by the way, to my knowledge, who makes a very interesting statement after reading the Quran, that there are parts of it which are absolutely brilliant. The parts of certain parts of the Quran which are sublime. and certain parts of it which is absolutely barbaric, and not only barbaric, it's like of the lowest, the product of the lowest human mind. So something like that, he says. And then he makes a statement that the founder of this religion is perhaps one of those examples where a person has a certain spiritual experience. There's an awakening of the mystical force, which we Hindus and the Hatha yogis and the yogic tradition believes in, called the Kundalini Shakti. But if that does not reach its proper culmination, and that reaching its culmination requires you to have a guru, at least a competent guru to guide you, because without the guru or somebody, as we say, an uttar sadhaka, sadhak of the higher caliber, you by your own will not be able to take it to the right destination. So if that does not happen, that energy, it is so tremendous, it can get stuck in some of the other chakras or something, and which will manifest as some degree of perversion into the person's behavior or something like that. So I'm not going into the details of the yogic aspect of this because that itself goes into there's a lot of thing in there. But more or less, so he gives the idea. So there is some truth in this book, in this text from the deserts, in what Prophet Muhammad had written. But also there's a lot of things that are complete nonsense, and this can only be explained by the fact that a person has a certain degree of spiritual experience, but due to lack of guides, due to lack of any other person to guide him properly, etc. So it ends up into a more problematic zone, whose net result is that the religion that comes out is very powerful, but it is also very dangerous. Dangerous to the extent that, history is already evident, you don't need to apply too much of intuitive ability to understand what consequences the rise of Islam had for the non-Muslims. So this I find is a very fantastic, two things I find here. One is that Swami Vivekananda by his nature was extremely truthful. So if he felt that something is the truth, it does not matter whether the person next to him feels happy about it, sad about it, accepts it, does not matter. He's going to tell it exactly as he thought it was. Number one point. Number two, at various points I find, overall, if you take his statements together, there's a nuance in what he is trying to say. And he remembered that he did not have the luxury to actually sit down and write his thoughts down. In writing, you have the scope that I'll write something tomorrow. I feel that, okay, it's not coming out exactly as I think, so let me change a comma here, add another phrase there, etc. So his interactions were impromptu, spontaneous interactions with people. So they used to ask him a question, and he used to have to answer that question immediately. So given all these factors together, I feel that there is a certain degree of nuance in which he approaches both these religions. He says that there is some truth in it, but he also says there's a lot of problem in it. So take both these two statements together, perhaps what he's saying is not that bad. And whether you accept it or not, it remains a fact that it is because of Swami Vivekananda, because of his character, because of his nature, his whole complete life, that conversions from the middle class Hindu to Christianity completely came to a stop. Because you don't need the bottom line of it today, if we put it in our words, it was just not cool to be a Christian anymore for the middle class. That's all. I mean, why would you want to be a Christian when you can be a Hindu itself? That put an end to completely the middle class. After that, did not convert anymore. Conversion then started among the the tribals, the lower, the villages, the rural areas, etc., where they used to what we have did the term we use called rise back conversion, etc. So all these things came into more prominence and force after that. And this is not my observation, by the way. This is what Sri S.R. Goel actually writes in his essays on Swami Vivekananda, some essays.
Very nice. I think Vivekananda says in his own very nice way. He says, the founder of the religion stumbled upon the truth.
Yes, right, exactly.
That's
I
kind of
remember that.
his way of saying
yes.
What.
He also said, show me one place where your religion succeeded without the sword. People don't realize what all he has actually said.
Yes.
People don't realize what all he actually said bluntly.
Yes.
He actually said, show me one I say, not two.
Yes.
He was on fire, and he was in his full, show me one I say, not two, where you have succeeded without the sword.
There is something I would like to add to what Rajarshi said, is that Ramesh, have you been to Kolkata ever?
Yeah, I've been to Kolkata. I've been to the
there is a strange phenomenon you would notice in the central part of the city, which is at St. Paul's Cathedral. That is, you would see a lot of Bengali Hindus entering the church, not because they believe in the Christ. It is more like what we are accusing Narendra Modi government of, turning the Kashi Vishwanath corridor into a tourist spot. It is somewhat like that. So they marvel at the architecture of the church, the serenity of the environment inside. You cannot deny the fact that inside a church there is a calming experience. But it is same like getting into the Lotus Temple of the Baha'i faith. There is nothing different there.
I'll just add what the Kanchi Paramachari actually said. Specific reference to the silence of a temple, silence of a church versus the noise of a temple. He said, "Why would we want the silence of a? Why do we want silence? Our God is the king of the temple, so we celebrate him with kettle drums and flutes and other things. We will celebrate. We will create noise. That is how we will do it. We don't want the silence of." So that's what the Paramacharya once answered specifically to this.
If you do a Google search on why missionaries or why Jesuit missions failed in Bengal, you would see a whole lot of essays by leaders of these Jesuit missions who said that they were just confounded and baffled by the fact that they would believe a Bengali Hindu to have converted and finally once again see him going to a temple and bowing before a deity. That was so baffling for them that because all these missionaries work on numbers. They are given targets that you are supposed to convert these many people, and it has to be a time-bound action. So that did not work there. But I would seize the opportunity to make a point on our contemporary society. I'm disturbed by the fact that most of the criticism of Ramakrishna Mission or Swami Vivekananda is coming from northern India, not from southern India. And I find an element of parochialism in this attack on Swami Vivekananda, which goes on to up to the attack on Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. It is also some kind of a discomfort with the iconic pantheon of Bengal, which I'll name them, which people of Uttar Pradesh and Bihar suffer from. Most of the criticism is coming from there. It is not from the other states of India. If your Hindutva is so enlightened, why cannot you stop a Kairana? Why cannot you stop Hindu exodus from Madhya Pradesh? There are pockets, why did you plant Muslims from nowhere in Dhar of Madhya Pradesh, all around the Saraswati Yajnishala? So these are questions that the Hindi belt must answer. If their Hindutva today is so evolved and so enlightened, it is so aware of what the enemy is capable of, why are they not able to stop these things? Now, this thing comes from essentially the January 1900 speech, Christ the Messenger. I think that is where it all started. And there, while extending the credo of Ramakrishna, Joto Mat Toto Pot, he also very, without mincing words, criticized Christians for not believing in the same. That, well, if I can appreciate one among you who I think, saw the light, why cannot you see similar personalities in other faiths? He did not talk about Hindus alone. He also spoke about Tibetan Buddhists, for example. He asked questions, what would you consider, how would you interpret the enlightenment of Gautama Siddhartha, for example? And of course, how philosophers see Vivekananda as is an Orientalist interpreting Jesus Christ. But I have seen on social media in the present day and age, for example, both Rohit ji and Rajarshi at times appreciate the Shakti inherent in certain people of other faiths, which the audience at large, finds difficult to come to terms with. But how can we deny the fact that unless there is spiritual prowess in you, you cannot prevail on such a large part of earth for centuries together, be it Christianity or Islam. So that is something which needs to be studied better rather than getting upset about it. That why we shouldn't appreciate the enemy at all, nothing about them at all. Rather than looking at it that way, we must study what other than of course the might of the sword by which Islam spread, by what means did they sustain themselves for such a long time, which is one thing. And talking about Jesus Christ, I would say that all the land that Christians occupied over the past 2000 years, they will gradually concede to Islamists. Because now, talking about the power of Christ, how many Christians believe in the power of Christ? Do they? It is more like, as I call it, a club membership drive. They are happy that they have converted legions of indigenous people across continents, but then are they able to retain those lands? Why are several countries breaking up due to the clash between Christianity and Islam? It has happened. It is happening in Africa. It has happened in Eastern Europe and so many other places. So perhaps, spiritually speaking, the power of Christ that Swami Vivekananda spoke of is something that Christians themselves do not appreciate anymore. This is very important to point out. And then you should also one should also not forget the fact that when it came to his own discourses, Vivekananda spoke about Bhagavad-Gita. He spoke about Krishna. And he said, in addition to finding God in Jesus of Nazareth, let us find him through all those prophets, the man gods he preceded, succeeded, or yet to follow Jesus. So these are parts which Christians will not appreciate. Right? They cannot think about other Jesus Christs and or other gods, let alone other gods. So what he saw, even in Jesus Christ, what he saw was he would often quote from the Gita to say, wherever thou findeth a great soul of immense power and purity, struggling to raise humanity, know that he is born of my splendor, that I am working there through him. So that was, he interpreted as this was something that could be seen in Jesus Christ. So even while looking at an alien culture, he is looking at it through the indigenous lenses. He is not looking at Jesus Christ how the Bible asks you to look at him. This is very important. And this is again a kind of philosophy which the missionaries find very difficult to handle. Whereas despite, Arya Samaj and certain other reform movements in other parts of the country, missionaries were never confused there. They were thoroughly confused in Bengal. They did not know how to proceed. Their numbers just stagnated. Yes, thank you.
Do you have any? I think the question that's come up in the chat also, I think that was already answered very, very clearly by Rajesh. I think this is just an interjection that is very clearly brought out the nuance. So,
I'd like to I'd like to raise an issue and ask the other members of the panel something I didn't realize till recently. So I'd like to know their views on it about Swami Vivekananda. First, Swami Vivekananda, I think it is fair to say that he was our first modern day celebrity. The Indian press, like he went abroad, he came back, and I think he was probably the first pan-India celebrity. The second point, which is the slightly more disturbing point, is we were celebrating somebody because he was celebrated in the West. So in his fame, there was a certain lack of cultural confidence, and there was a certain lack of a Swami was being honored. Swami was being carted from one end of the land to the other because he became famous in the West. The Swami was not being honored because of who he was.
Yes.
So in that sense, that Vivekananda's fame, in that sense of Vivekananda's sudden rise to prominence, because it was not done by the European media press, it was done entirely by the vernacular, as they used to call it, and the Indian editions of the English language press. But in one sense, there was a very deep sense of, what should I say, cultural lack of confidence, which he, of course, he poured his life energy out to rectify it, even as she made that point. But a template was established where unless you get a stamp of approval from the West, you're not really, and I think that is one of the big problems, that Vivekananda's fame came from something which is problematic. Would you agree with that? Or because I just recently had this thought, so I don't know if it is a valid question or a, and the fact that he was a celebrity, which was also very unique, and he was an English-speaking celebrity, which is again very unique.
I think I'll
All
start
these
with
were he was a very strange amalgamation of time and circumstance. But his fame, I am not so happy about his fame anymore. I'm very happy about all that he has said and done and written, but I'm not so happy about the reason for his fame anymore. So what would you think? I would like everybody to address this.
I think I'll start with Ram, because it is quite some time since Ram has come in, so and then go to the.
So I think I will reflect on what Shri Guru has said and also connect with some of the past comments. I think there is sort of a continuity in what Shri Guru has said from the discussions we are having about the other faiths and religions in that context. I'll directly come to the aspect of the fame. Fame is a mysterious thing. It is just thrusted upon most often. Nobody has this ability to grab it, and if somebody tries to do that, it is not going to stay in. That sort of mysterious thing. And I feel the validation that we have received from the West, especially on Swami Vivekananda's greatness, and it is because they have clapped and celebrated him.
No, I'd like to interrupt there. The West does not care about Swami Vivekananda. The West does not remember Swami Vivekananda except the Hindu-phobic Indology departments.
Yes.
Like Vivekananda's fame in the West is a purely world famous all over India. Literally.
Yeah. So then I would like to qualify my statement about our perception of his fame in the West.
Yes.
I think that is more appropriate to say. What I would only say is that because all this is happening in our minds, and so essentially our minds are the ones which are perpetually seeking validation. And it is in that macroscopic environment, which we can say, Prakriti, which was dominant in our own selves. This validation could have been, it is inescapable in a way, that unless somebody stamps us that, oh, okay, you are great. I think there are two streams that were getting addressed by the seers at the turn of that century, be it Swami Vivekananda, Shri Aurobindo, and many others. So there were two primary things that were concerning them. One was the faiths, other faiths, which is Islam and Christianity. Another one is to position simultaneously that Sanatana Dharma and the essence of it is based on a sound reasoning. That is something more to do with the scientific thrust that was coming. At that point in time, we did not have the intelligence to see that the most of the scientific gaze was only nothing but a disguise of, again, the Abrahamic religions trying to disguise themselves as scientific or something else. The science has a very deep, at that point in time, to some extent, science had a deep rooted inseparability with this faith. At least, to some extent, the Christian macro environment was important in trying to generate a very skewed science to some extent. So we were always reasoning out, saying that how profoundly rational we are in our culture and all of that. But the simple fact is that majority of the population which follows a religion has and goes by the instincts of the faith and the belief does not operate from the realm of the reason. And faith and religion has got very little to do with the reasoning in its, at least in its nascent and the fledgling states. So coming back to this point of Swami Vivekananda's fame as we perceive it, that was the most dominant aspect in our minds. So unless something plays out on that familiar stage of validation, it would not register in our minds. So therefore it was inevitable. And I would completely agree with Shri Guru that if we were to stick our measurement through the yardstick of this perceived fame on Swami Vivekananda, we will falter again and again on this matter. There is a, I worked, I continue to work, and I worked in a lot of villages in my, some time ago, about 20 years ago, I visited Nellore, part of Andhra. That was as part of my village sevas. And I was sitting in a medical camp, and I was giving I was just following the doctor's prescriptions and giving the medicines to the villagers, as seva we were doing. And prescription after the prescription is coming in Nellore, in Andhra, with the names Matthews, James. And I used to, as a youngster, look at the prescription and look at this guy. And I was trying to connect, what is James, what is Matthews doing on this prescription? Who are these people? Do they even have some sense and semblance of what's happening around? And then I thought maybe it is some kind of an erratic data point. Few people, not few people. When we served, we used to serve 3 clusters of the villages. The cluster of villages, all 80 to 90% of them, for heaven's sake, are converted. And this is, I'm talking 20 years ago, 2001. And when I debated this, when I inquired this, our own people throw all sorts of platitudes and and the same old thing of we caste and this and that, and so that's why conversion. None of that sounded rational for me. Another impactful statement from Swami Vivekananda's writings, I would roughly paraphrase. I don't remember exactly. I think it was from his lectures, collected works only. That where he says, it is only once that the West perceived the presence of a godly figure, whereas in India the gods came again and again in the human forms, and we continue to revere them even at the risk of faltering. If we were to wrongly identify somebody who is not great and still revere them, we did not mind to falter on that front. But only once did a so-called divine figure appear in the West, and what happened to him was he was crucified. Right. And this was a very impactful statement. What it basically, he was throwing light on this environment of the West, which did not have, having said the faith and belief and all of that, when something like a persona came amidst them who was enlightened and who was giving light to them, and at that point in time, at that juncture, at least they did not have the ability to accept it. So he was crucified. So this cultural difference he highlights. So, but this also brings along a very nuanced approach. That's in his general approach, he has been rather careful in not trying to put the figures that were very important in these other faiths in a bad light and bad assessment and bad analysis, and which is very very a perceptive approach to do so, especially for a sannyasi. But whereas he critiqued the other cultural nuances and other aspects of the religions, and he said that the religion is kind of standing in hypocrisy and paradox with the teachings of their core preceptors in a way, and that was an important thing. And he also was operating in continuation with Sri Guru's reflections. He was also operating in a space where the interface with the non-native cultures, we were interfacing with gradually globalizing environment, and he had to tread that. What we forget is that all that he was there in his body was only 38, 39 years. And in that, predominantly, you cannot even account for his adolescence and his younger days and his queries and all of that. What he did maximum was as a sense of parivrajaka, and then as a sense of missionary monk, who went out and did what he did. So it compresses into very short time frame what he's saying and what he is doing. If you were to actually look at even Sri Aurobindo very carefully, phenomenal amount of writing that he has done comes from the span of just 1916 to 1924. Essays on Gita, synthesis of yoga, the life divine, Savitri, take whatever it may, it is only in these 6 years he just blasted through. When the spiritual Shaktis unfold in the physical frame in the terrestrial sojourn, they just achieve a lot in a very short span of time. These and many things happen. So when people are not acting like snipers, but they are going full-fledged as a spiritual Shakti, they are just going with bigger ammunition. They are not going to be as sensitive as you,
Yes.
where you have the advantage with the internet,
Right.
pull up this excerpt, take that testimony and make this analysis, read 10 times Sitaram Goel or something else and make this analysis,
Do a
and then
Google search.
Google search, and then feel suddenly high about it. Oh, I discovered something to pinpoint. And I completely also sync with the parochialism aspect which Surajit ji has mentioned, and there is an element of that. And it's a practical problem. See, even that happens. We in Hyderabad, in as a capital, the biggest cultural center as a youngster, when I was there, when it was built, it was named after Rabindranath Tagore. Only 10 years down the lane, I asked, did we not have any cultural great figures in our own culture that we could have named them after? Right? This is the sense. So there is a two things to it. One is these figures are so big, they did make an impact. You cannot sit in denial saying that, okay, so you do not like Swami Vivekananda's approach. So take somebody from your culture, tell what impact has happened. What is the level of impact that has been? So I will take, say, Vishwanath Satyanarayana or somebody from Andhra, who's phenomenal. He is somebody in 1940s and 50s and 30s. He wrote fiction which is critiquing the left. And he talks about an angel coming from the heavens and landing in the Trafalgar Square in London, and says that, and why this yaksha, not even an angel, this yaksha cannot stay in Trafalgar Square anymore, and he has to leave because the value system, they cannot understand and connect with this energy of this subtle space. And this is the level of strength, of the intellectual strength even the other cultural leaders had. But please understand the dynamics of the karma, that not everybody will be having the spotlight of the sun on them. There are few people who turn up in the century, turn up at the crucial junctures, and the spotlight of the sun is there. Now you can comment saying that, no, that spotlight was a fabricated one and all of that. No, you cannot say that. When you actually see Swami Vivekananda's assessment of these other faiths, he's also very clearly differentiating the prophetic and non-prophetic faiths. He is making a clear distinction, saying that in the Sanatana Dharma, in the Hinduism, he even brings assessment on Buddhism, to so to say. That he says that Buddhism was nothing but, in a way, a continuation of the Sanatana Dharmic thought, but it has been turned so into a prophetic a religion, which in its essence is not the case. So, and he also brought in my view, some great powers like Sister Nivedita, who did not natively belong to this culture, and we conveniently try to skip that. And she has played a materialistically resourceful role in building and galvanizing the freedom struggle and touching upon the important people. There is a sense of reasonable inconvenience we have when our traditions and our practices interface with people from the non-cultures, but there are people who have, for some karmic reasons, some sincere connection with our own goals, and they also have a sincere commitment to this, and these leaders have managed to integrate them into our cultures. Can this be applied as a broad stroke and let us be open for everybody? I am not saying that. I am saying that when these great works happen, many people come, like the Parivara Devatas of our Devatas. There will be many people at the right time, the right Shaktis come. And the most powerful religions and faiths and most materialistically resourceful civilizations at the turn of the century were the West. You do not have any Ambanis during that time. You do not have any other great resourceful people. So if you are trying to build something of your own, you have to have an interface with them, not with a slavish mentality, but with a sense of conviction about your own cultures and its greatness, and make them realize its greatness, make them buy into it and support your cause and vision. That is a genius, I feel, and it is not a handicap in our case. We at the best are a 30-year-old, 40-year-old liberated economy, so to say. And most of our rich people are confused a lot, and they don't know where to put their money in terms of strengthening our own culture and our own Shakti. In such an environment, if we go and say that, let's cancel whole of FCRA coming into the country, you are stupid if you're saying that. What is the material? You need to have a sankalpa that whatever material resource comes has to come and feed into your adhyatmic goal and your sankalpa. You cannot just simply say no materialistic thing should come into your kitty. There has to be some other more nuanced way of stopping the harm and adverse forces and benefiting from those who can help you. So these are my broad thoughts on that.
I wanted to specifically respond to that thing about our people being confused about where to park their funds. They're not confused. I think most of them, the people who actually park it, if they will take up a chair at, they specifically give funds to the leftists, because most of the people who are in this space, particularly in our country, are essentially people who are dyed in the wool kind of, come from the leftist ecosystem. That's why you don't, most of the time when they create a chair outside in Harvard or some other place, they'll give the funds to people who are.
I absolutely just like to add one point to Ramesh. What you have said is that when we are critiquing and attacking someone of this caliber of Swami Vivekananda, we need to, this apne pair pe khuladi marna, they say in Hindi. The most happiest people are the adverse forces who want the dharmic, rejuvenation to completely dismantled. Actually, they do not have courage to critique him the way we ourselves end up doing it. So what they are the most happiest when this thing happens. So people who indulge in something like this should know that what they are doing is a self-harm, and this needs to stop.
Yes, sorry.
Yeah, I wanted to take the question that Rohit ji asked. And in doing that, the problem with not Swami Vivekananda, but where his fame comes from, a chunk of it coming due to,
No.
coming from the Western recognition. So I would deal with that question in two parts. One part is, in this rare case, saying that the West is not a monolith. I see Europe and the United States differently in this particular case. And then in the second part, I'll talk about the recognitions that come from the West. So, first of all, let me clarify where I come from. I have lived in Europe. I have not lived in the US, but I have perhaps, dealt with more Americans without going to the US by interacting with the parents of my American students who study at the US Embassy School in New Delhi. Lots and lots of them, lots of batches, and they come to India for about 3 years or so, and then they go away. So till the time they are here and they are working for the United States government. So they live in and around places like Vasant Vihar and all in Delhi. What I have seen as a remarkable difference, and this I have had a chat with Sam Pitroda once during the 2005 Indian Science Congress in Ahmedabad, Gujarat. where he agreed that while both Europe and the US are broadly defined as the West, the European tendency of looking down upon us comes from racism and supremacism. While some of it has carried on to the US when they settled their colonies there, the white people settled their colonies there. If you constantly interact with these two sets of people, you will realize that the Americans are not as condescending towards Indians as the Europeans are, as the British, French, German, Dutch people, etc. are. So Swami Vivekananda got his first recognition in the US, not in Europe. In that, I would say that despite all the shortcomings of the West, there was an element in Americans that wanted to learn what was happening beyond their realm. They miserably fail every time. You can see the way yoga is understood by Americans. They fail, but they make an earnest effort to understand things they don't. So that is not the case with Europe. Europe feels that the white people have descended on earth हमारा उद्धार करने के लिए. We are struggling, we are gutter snipes, and they are going to take us to heaven. That is the attitude with which Europe looks at the third world. America does not quite look at it like that. Now I come to the second part, which is recognition by the West. Let's talk about two other big names from Bengal, Satyajit Ray and Amartya Sen. Now, when Satyajit Ray got the Oscar, we at least the fans of his cinema did not need that Oscar to recognize Satyajit Ray. We were already celebrating him, and it gave us extra happiness the day the Academy, through Audrey Hepburn, made that announcement that Satyajit Ray would be getting that. At the same time, very honestly, despite so much of reading that I do, I did not have the foggiest of idea of who the hell this Amartya Sen was before he got the Nobel. I had absolutely no idea. And it was since the time he got Nobel in economics that the whole of India started celebrating him. And, he was a dream come true for the UPA dispensation. So anything awkward they wanted the people to believe in, they made Amartya Sen say that. And, Amartya Sen is very relevant in our talk today because he has been one of the worst misrepresenters of Hinduism. If you look at his interpretations of the Mahabharata and other Puranas, Amartya Sen's interpretations, it is horrible, and he is very popular among the woke and of course also among the left. But of the left, since I would say the Ram Janmabhoomi movement, because before that they were very clearly not covertly atheists. They swore by atheism, but when they found a wave in society turning against them, they started reinterpreting things, in a rationalizing way, saying that we do not rule out the belief system of Hindus, but we just look at it in a different way. Whereas the woke crowd would just lap up anything that comes from the West. So I would qualify this recognition by West in a different way, whether it comes in the form of recognition of Satyajit Ray that way, or it comes in the form of recognition of Amartya Sen. These are two completely different things. And for some people, I think that validation was not required. That validation from the US was not required. But for a lot many others, it was required, and that is certainly unfortunate. Yeah, I absolutely agree with Rohit ji. It is unfortunate that that should be the bigger source of his fame. Yeah.
Even Rabindranath, till he got his Nobel Prize, was regarded as some kind of guy who's fiddling with the purity of the language. Calcutta University put up a passage of his work and said, rewrite in correct Bengali. Can you believe that? Can you even imagine a situation like that? But once he got the Nobel Prize, okay, fine.
Yeah.
So it is not, you know me, I cannot demean Vivekananda in any way. But it just occurred to me that the reason why he became so important was a rather sad reason, Like we did not, it is like who was that Swamiji in Karnataka, Ramesh, who was 11 years old, and he was called the God who walks amongst us, and all the obituaries were about his NGO work.
Yeah, Shivakumara Swamiji.
Yeah, all the obituaries were about his NGO work, and I'm like, he's been a sannyasi since age 23.
I wrote
to 111.
Yeah, I wrote about him. I think that was the only one where I spoke about the spiritual side.
Yeah, and did he not have any spiritual accomplishments? Did he have, it is all hospital beds and school books.
Right. He was
so it was just, so I just felt that, like, to me, I suppose there was no other way, there was no other way that it could have happened. So I'm not going to complain about that, but, the template unfortunately got, and then, Rabindranath, who is like God in Bengal, but he was not always God, till the Nobel Prize came, he was not God. He was a stormy petrel sort of.
In fact, Gitanjali happens to be one of his inferior creations.
Well, let's not get into that, Baba. Let's not get into.
He was marvelous.
Let's not get into imposition of emergency person always quoting whether my mind is without fear. Into that heaven of freedom, let my country awake. Chitta Jeta Vaishunno is not whether mind is without fear. They're two different poems altogether. So let's not get into that. Rajarshi, could you please say something about the issue that I raised?
Yeah, I was just looking through the questions also, and on that topic.
I think we should stop looking at the questions here. We have
I looked at the questions because I would like to.
We have got into a flow.
We've gotten into a flow now.
No, I got that. I would like to club this answer with a specific question that came in, I think, number 7 and 10. We may not have much time, but I would like to address those two because it has a link to the topic we are discussing at the moment. I feel there's a link. So before going ahead, let me just read briefly number 7. I think somebody has mentioned a question that's kind of valid, that Swami Vivekananda was an Advaitin. He had a very strong antagonistic attitude towards Tantra. So what does that translate to? Sort of, you get the gist of it. And number 10 question is that whether the Ramakrishna mission is actually following the brand of Hinduism or what Swami Vivekananda had conceptualized. Is there a need for recalibration? So the second question is very easy. Whether there's a need for recalibration or not is irrelevant. It's not going to happen. So why waste time thinking about it? Once, as many, the learned speakers already mentioned, once a founder said something, it is set in stone. What best you can do is that you found another mission of your own and you can put in your rules. Nobody will object to that, but you will never be able to go back to a mission or any organization or a math or anything, whether it's 100 years old or whether it's 1,000 years old. Once the the key influencers have set in certain degree of rules, whether it's right or wrong, people will keep following it. ये नियम है, इसको मतलब तोड़ना असंभव है. Nobody will be able to do much about it. So, you wanted to say something?
No, I just agreed with you, gave you a thumbs up in the sense.
Yeah. Okay. So that part we have to leave it aside. And does it follow Swami Vivekananda's ideals? I believe that more or less 95% it follows what Swami Vivekananda had. As far as it's possible to humanly, codify the rules, he only is the one who gave most of the rules. Ki when you have to get up, how long you have to do what, etc., what practices and how much seva and things like that. And sort of largely they follow them. So the idea that we can, this comes actually from a certain kind of, I can empathize with the idea that, okay, there is already a well-established organization. What if we take it and kind of, change its ideas a bit more suitable for our times? But that is not going to happen. So there's no, use either excessively criticizing them, because then that happens is there is an aspect of it which is very beneficial from the Ramakrishna Math and mission that happens for the sake of Dharma. They may not be in the kind of propaganda mode as some other organizations are, but I have seen that. So least we should not, our criticism should not be of that kind of intensity and pitch that, you throw the baby out along with the bathwater. You criticize if there's no harm in it, but ensure that the positive aspects don't get completely overshadowed and you criticize to the extent that, the Ramakrishna Math and people associated become antagonistic towards you completely. So that balance is very important. It's one thing. That apart, now coming to the earlier question, which we were discussing. So how do I look at the fame that Swami Vivekananda got? I have absolutely no opinion about it at this moment. I really don't know, but I think that perhaps it was useful at that time. That fame helped him gather resources. He had an idea to build the Ramakrishna mission. So perhaps it, without finances, nothing works. Otherwise, if you don't have finances, you can go to the Himalayas and sit in a cave. And what does it matter what happens down below the Himalayas? So those aspects did play a part. But here I would like to make a slight, divergent tone. My personal way in which I look at Swami Vivekananda, I hold him in very high regards as a man of tremendous spiritual power, of a specific kind of spiritual power. No two individuals are enlightened in the same way. Number one thing, we have a very broad and superficial idea once this word enlightenment and these things came in. And I'm not even discussing whether Swami Vivekananda attained enlightenment or not. I'm just saying spiritual power he had plenty. And that exactly is the key why even today we are discussing. There is no denying of it. In fact, when I read him very carefully, I read him not so much because I want to know his thoughts. That was the initial way in which I used to read him. Now more because I'm trying to make an assessment of the kind of spirituality that he has. And that is more for, more for my understanding of the process. So he had a strong intuitive mind, but he used to, project the intuitive mind through a garb of rationalism. So that he had a very clear principle, sort of an ideology, spiritual ideology that was into his mind right from the time of the Brahma Samaj, and then it was kind of further cemented by his interaction with Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, so that you have to only focus on the principles and the philosophical aspect of the religion, and that way you bring people. So you do not harp too much about the associated mysterious, mystical, and the other aspects of the religion, which are also in a way very key to any religion, to be honest. So he used to downplay that. But because he downplayed does not mean that he did not believe in them or that he did not experience them. Those elements come up in his speech. And the most amazing part about Vivekananda, I feel, is that if you read his speech very often, and especially the Chicago speech and all that, when I read it today, I feel completely bored. This is like absolutely, I can also write a speech like that. I would have written something exactly similar in class 10, 11 only. There's no big deal about it. What changes the whole thing is that if those words were coming out live from that individual in that moment, there is a power behind that word. For lack of any other words, any other expressions, let's say there's a specific Shakti in that in which he expresses it. And that is innate to him, that individual. That changes everything. Once that is there in an individual, even if it tells you that 2 + 2 is adding to 4, you will think, with profit that is different matter. That is, he had it, others did not, and that is why we are discussing it. But in the era that he lived, and that is not just for him, that applies across the spectrum, from whether it was the more famous spiritual figures like Vivekananda, or somewhat to the more the more traditional and conservative spiritual figures. They were living in an environment where the West and the Western thought was completely dominant, where colonized ideas were dominant. So whether you like it or not, in all their expressions of thoughts, in the way they used to speak and they write or speak or convey their opinions, there is going to be a bit of the Occidental gaze into it, and you cannot deny it. It is there in Sri Aurobindo, it is there in Swami, it is there in pretty much everybody of that era that I've read. And because you are in that environment, and perhaps if you and me were there at the time, we would have also been talking in those terms. Very subtle things. It may be in some cases more, some cases less, but it is impossible to deny. It's like saying that, I survive on earth, but I don't breathe in oxygen. That's not possible, because it's everywhere, and your system is designed in that way that if you're surviving at that point, you will be using those terminologies, those frameworks, whether you understand them or not. Per se, there is nothing wrong in it, except that, which means I may or may not agree with everything that Swami Vivekananda said. Specifically, if a particular statement or a particular paragraph is taken just randomly out of context, and if you ask me that, do you agree with this, then I will make a rational assessment of it based on how I understand things, and I may or may not agree with it, which does not at all change my respect for the man, because my respect comes from, as I mentioned, the same thing when he says it versus when you read it, it makes a whole different impact, and that is because there is a certain power in it, and adhyatmik, a tremendous amount of spiritual power. Like you sort of, he was a vibhuti. If you read the chapter on the vibhuti yoga, you understand what is a vibhuti. So he was a vibhuti. So vibhuti has a tremendous high amount of spiritual power. That power I bow down to and I completely respect. And if a man like him were to come in front of me, I would first thing do is, do a Shashtang Pranam to him, because that is the power that is governing him, and that is the power because of which today, 100 years later also, we are discussing him, and perhaps 500 years later, Vivekananda will attain a status which we today accord to an Adi Shankar or somebody like that. And I can give it to you in writing. It is exactly, this is how it progresses. This is how when a great vibhuti comes, slowly over time, it gathers a certain amount of power, and it gathers more power after they leave the physical body. It is not that story, khatam nahi hota hai ki I left my body and I died. No. Still influences people, still influences minds, various things it does. Swami Vivekananda is en route to becoming something like that in the next few centuries. Nobody can stop that. That is like a thing that is already accomplished. But because he lived a short life, because he was always on the move, because he was spontaneously reacting to people and did not have the luxury to sit and think and check and all that, there are various things at various points, ideas that he held, which I do not agree with. And to put it in other words, I believe that had Vivekananda lived up till, say, 80 years old, he himself might have reviewed his own ideas from the younger age. So some of the things that he thought was right and perhaps true, etc., he might have actually, as age goes on, he would have, sort of recalculated, and seen that whether this is right or wrong. And that is and that I believe is a completely wonderful characteristics, and that's the characteristics of a very strong individual. Anybody who says that my ideas are fixed from the age of 18 is a fool. Either you cannot think, or you have no mental development. That's it. Because as you go ahead, as you read more, as you interact, as life goes on, your ideas are bound to change. That happens with everybody, and spiritual people like Swami Vivekananda is not an exception. It's just that he died too young. Had he lived another few decades more, he might have had certain amount of, relook at his own thoughts. So, bottom line I'm trying to say is that I do not look at the fame that he attained at that time in a negative light, but at the same time, I do not consider all of what he has said to be absolutely sacrosanct. So this is, if somebody comes and tells me that, okay, Vivekananda said this, so ye manna hi parega. No, it doesn't work that way. So if Vivekananda says 2 + 2 5 or 2 + 2 4, I will rationally judge that based on my understanding, my experience, etc. And if I find it acceptable, I'll accept it. That said, it does not in any way change the respect I have for Vivekananda, because it is not the persona of Vivekananda. It is not the character of Vivekananda. It is not the man who used to wear a pagri and who was born another. It is the power that is guiding him that I bow down to. There is no denying it, that there is a tremendous amount of absolutely divine power. There is no question about it. So he's the kind of man you can, at this moment I may argue, if he were to stand in front of me, most likely 5 minutes later I'll say that, oh boss, whatever you're saying is right. That kind of power here. And this is not something that comes only through practices, because practice everybody does. There's something that comes from by birth. Okay. So Swami Vivekananda's opinions on Tantra, I more or less reject them. He lived in an environment where the development of Tantra was slightly different. The Britishers were one of the first people who stigmatized the practices of Tantra sadhana. Britishers means not just any Britishers, specifically once the missionaries came. So they looked at it as specifically because there are two aspects that comes in Tantra sadhana. One is that the multiplicity of deities. Tantra doesn't start with the Nirguna worship at all. There's no, you don't go there. And by Tantra, I do not only mean the Tantra of the goddess. I mean any kind of process, whether it's Shiva, whether it's Vishnu, it could be anybody. Number two is that there are practices, it's intensely ritualistic. Of all the prevalent branches of Hinduism at this moment, Tantra is the most ritualistic, and only corresponding ritual-heavy branch of Hinduism you will find is perhaps the Vedic Mimamsa, Purva Mimamsa schools, okay, not the Vedantic schools. Vedantic schools are more philosophical oriented. Tantra starts with ritual, philosophy comes in later. That is how it is to be practiced, and it has been practiced for centuries. So obviously what happens is the Abrahamic mindset, especially in that era, when they had a by and large a negative perception of India, and plus they came with a very sinister agenda of converting people. Let's be very blunt, it is an absolutely sinister agenda they had. And they come to India, so they found that, okay, so this was like a preset format for them. Okay, we just have to tell them that the pagan cultures are bad, pagan religions are bad, that the Ratha of Lord Jagannath that is taken, so that is such a terrible eyesore, what the hell are you guys doing, something like that. So create that hawa, कि तुम लोगों को कुछ आता नहीं है, मैं आया हूँ बाहर से, I will teach you what is to be done, you convert to my religion. The same basic idea that they had been doing for God knows how many centuries and how many places across the world, same format they applied. And the first thing they did is, one of the first things they did is pick up Tantra and put and show it as a example of pagan perversion and this and that, etc. People in that era, the elite sections of the Hindu society in that era, especially in Bengal, middle class and upper middle class, they did not look at the British coming to India, by the way, the same light as they saw the Mohammedans coming, the invasion of the Islamists. So British were initially, when they came, they were actually looked upon as kind of somebody who's liberating you from the Mohammedan influence. Okay, so it was celebrated. There was Durga Pujas done. And mind you, this is not only Bengal. The same thing happened across India. I mean, there are records of it initially. So Britishers were more like a group of traders who sort of came in. The army and all that aspect was there, no doubt, but it was more of, a slow, soft roasting of the mind towards a more pliable, colonial conversion. That is what they did. It was, instead of the very drastic, okay, let's come by the sword and kill you straight away, put you into the sword, and either you convert, except right now, or you're gone. No. So it was a more different type of influence, a more, mix of the Kshatriya influence or a mix of the trader influence mindset that was there in the British Empire. So people, the elite, middle class and the others, they got highly influenced by all these things. There is no denying it. As I said, that if you were alive in that era, you are very likely to be influenced by the British thoughts, somewhere or the other. The British, by British, I mean the Western thoughts. So they also assumed that, okay, by and large, the deficiencies of Dharma is because our religion, we have given up the Upanishadic ideas, the few Upanishads that are there, which are very high philosophy, we have given that up. We have gone into various other streams that are there, which are equally important, by the way, in Hindu Dharma, whether going to the temples, the temple rituals, and Tantra is a very integral part of that process. So we have done that, practiced all these parts, living the Upanishads, and that is why we were easily overtaken by the Westerners, by the Abrahamics and things like that. So there was this conscious effort to, let's go back to the Upanishads, let's make a one deity system and things like that. And aping of monotheism was very much in vogue in that era to some degree among the elite and all that. And this, mind you, this problem comes fundamentally, if you go even more, it is not even a problem of the East versus West. It's a problem of monotheistic propaganda versus polytheism. And unfortunately, 95% of polytheists, which we actually are, do not even understand the structure of polytheism. So in fact, it's so funny that if I was speaking to somebody some days ago about polytheism, and he's like, oh no, we are not polytheist. We actually worship one, and etc. etc. Full the stereotyping, the propaganda has gone so thorough deep inside. It's a gut reaction that you have to tell, no, I'm actually worshipping one, and that one has become many. So anyway.
Take concept.
So this
I'd
propaganda.
like to say one thing. Rajarshi made a very pertinent point that if he had lived longer, he would have changed his views. He actually did modify his views significantly about Tantra, because towards the end of his life, he said that all our temple traditions, all our puja rituals, everything is Tantra.
Yes.
So from a fierce rejection of anything tantric, he had come to a lot of acceptance.
Yes.
And there was this split between his Western persona and his Indian persona. His Western disciples saw him always austere Himalayan peaks of Vedanta. And when he came here, he's in Langot and he's playing the dhol and rolling on the ground in ecstasy. And they're like, what happened? Where is the great philosopher? Where is the great? So, his point that he would have modified his views, I think, is because he was already in the process of modifying them. And his shift in Tantra, and he's saying that whatever we do as a ritual, whatever we do as a religion is tantric based, so we cannot reject. He had a little Brahmo allergy to the Vamachara,
Yes.
That was
Perfect.
And just to add to that point of what Shri Guru was saying, but in the book on Vivekananda, what the Western disciples had to say about Vivekananda, one of them says, you go to Vivekananda, listen to what he says once, don't go back to him, because he'll confuse you further, because he would have changed his views. He'll give you something else now. So that go to him, learn something, just come and practice. So that's it. Yeah.
Just an addition to that, you see, at the end of the day, he is a disciple of great Shakta. That is, greatest perhaps that we had ever, and who Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa has really that's one very subtle aspect about it is Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa always emphasized, articulated, even in Charitamrita that we get to see, or the book which is talking about his life instances, is the sattvic nature is getting more emphasis. And I'll just probably tell quickly this, somebody very close, and he is complaining, Sri Ramakrishna is complaining to somebody very close, saying that, am I getting too attached to my disciples? Why do I feel their absence? Is this something happening to me? Why am I getting attached to this set of people who are youngsters around me? Then immediately somebody very wise close to him says, and makes him say this, and he acknowledges. He says that when you are going into the Bhava Samadhi, into the higher states, and when you are returning, if the energy that surrounds you is not of the similar purity, then there is a shock that you receive because of this experience. That is where these disciples are so pure in nature. I'm talking from the guna perspective of the sattva. They are so pure in nature that you need their presence. That is what, and this is a very, very important chemistry that takes place between the guru and the sishyas. Among such sattvic disciples and the purity and all of that is there, he is the lion, Swami Vivekananda, because when he enters the room, everybody else vanishes for Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. So this was like a important, and then what I'm talking about is a Maha Upasaka of the Kali, getting attached and attracted to someone of Swami Vivekananda's caliber. There is something more deep in there, rather than the analysis of this. And I completely already see the transition what Shri Guru and Rajarshi have mentioned on the Tantra aspect, and what we see in continuation, that how Shri Aurobindo himself recalibrated about his views on Tantra, that he also goes in the similar trend, that by roughly around 40s, 50s, everybody started taking a more realistic stance about it, I think.
Yes, and just one point I would like to add here, if Ram is done. So actually, this is true that in fact, last year of his life, Swami Vivekananda, his opinions on Tantra sort of mellowed down by the time he was And to the specific question, by the way, if somebody mentions this question, okay, Vivekananda said that you should stay away from Tantra, indeed in his younger age. But, if you look at it logically, we believe that there is the disciple, and disciple ke upar hai, disciple ka guru. Okay? Or guru ke upar hai shastra. This is the chronology. So here is the man whose guru himself had done all the 64 priyas of Tantra. And he writes about it also, and that too written by Sharadananda, another of his disciples. Full details of it. There is nothing there. Getting bones from animals, sitting in the cremation ground, all the Panchamakara, except one Makara he does not do, which is the Pancham Makara, which is the, the rituals of Vamachara that involve ritualized sex, that Ramakrishna does not do because they celibate for life. So he does it in an Anukalpa method. Anukalpa is a tantric method of doing something which is you do a substitute for actually instead of doing that. But leaving that aside, sitting in a cremation ground and meditating, Virachara practices, getting skulls, bones, this, that, etc. Full hog, he goes 64. All the kriyas of Tantra he practices, and he sees that he finds that all of them are wonderful and they work, etc. In fact, the funny thing is that it is in these contexts that Ramakrishna actually says that Jatamap Tatavam. Vaishnavapat will work, Shaktapat will work, Tantra will work, this will work. From that, what people have done is they've completely rejected the whole biography. They have picked up one small minor instance where he put some Islamic sadhana he might have done, and one day of his life, and one day as a Christian, something he had seen, and then added these two together and made a political statement that he's saying all of them are saying. No, in fact, there's an instance in the Kathamrita. There is one of the famous writers comes to him who had converted to Christianity. Very writer, and Ramakrishna is sitting, and the writer is sitting, and somebody tells Ramakrishna that he has converted to Christianity. Ramakrishna was a villager, by the way. He could not write his name and all that. So his reactions are unfiltered. So he hears that he has converted. First reaction turns to the ground and spits. That is his reaction. Spitting on the ground. The moment you tell him that this man has converted from Hinduism, that is his organic reaction. Ab batao. Abhi, whenever there are people who say that Ramakrishna did, little bit of some Islamic thing and etc. So he lived for whatever number of years. Usme pura zindagi mein 2 days, one day for Christianity, one day for Islam, rest every day for Kali, but you forget all that. Oh, he was doing Jatavata. And the joke is writing itself, seriously. You want to delude yourself, you can delude in 1 million ways. Usme you don't need to bring in Ramakrishna to delude yourself.
It's done on purpose, no? You have to sell the secular. You have to sell the secular dream to everyone. So,
so
even in that illustrated book that you have, there are 2 pages dedicated to this.
Yeah.
Illustrated book that
the virus is very strong.
mission itself publishes. There will be 2.
Virus is very strong. See, I don't want to go too much into it, except that last 1-2 years I've been staying in Eastern India, and I can say that the colonization is very deep. That's all I can say. Okay, the British is gone, but some people are still 19th century में ही था सब कुछ, उसके बाद कुछ नहीं. तो वो वाला scene अभी भी है. So like that.
Ramesh.
I have to ask that, we are 2 hours, 10 minutes into it. How are you all placed on time? So I just wanted to check.
No, I am fine. What time is it?
Today is Sunday, so I'm not editing Sirf News today. So
keep going till we fall.
Ramesh, I would like Rohit ji and Rajarshi to take one or all of the questions 13 to 15. And I'd like to ask you, how is question number 12 relevant to this talk?
Question number 12. I actually
12 is new education.
No, question number 12. I've edited it out of.
No, that will skip that.
No, I've said I've skipped it. I've skipped that question.
Yeah, 13, 14, and 15. Any of the questions or all of them, if Rajarshi and Rohitji would please.
Okay. Didn't we take up the thing? This is about Christianity, Vivekananda's take on Christianity with the right perspective.
Let's not talk anymore about Vivekananda and Christianity. I mean, it's
like
वो
हो गया. उसका तो अभी Jesus Christ आ जाएगा. बोले अभी नहीं है, मेरे टीम में नहीं है. अब आगे जाओ.
I think the other question about that I was also very keen on is the one on the critical mass that is required for Hindu Dharma. I think Vivekananda was able to build that kind of.
Make one additional point to the last I was saying. Right. In the flow I forgot. So we actually do see that Vivekananda's change stance towards Tantra in the last year of his life, more specifically. So he gets to 3 important things. One is that he started meditating on Kali, and how do we find this information? Though he's very categorical about not bringing it out. So there is one statement where one of his disciples actually, I think, asks him about Kali, and he says that no, not in this lifetime, maybe some other time. I will speak about Kali because you guys are not yet ready to understand what she represents, etc., the power she has. And the last year of his life, he gets a dream, and he has this strong desire that there should be Kali Puja and Durga Puja that should be done in the ashram. So, specifically for the Kali Puja, he is not alive by the time the date of the Kali Puja comes, but he expresses his desire explicitly to his brother disciples that not only should the Kali Puja be done, but it should be done in the Tantric Achar, which means that even if the brother disciples may know how to worship Kali, they do not have the adhikara to worship her. So what they do is that during the Kali Puja, time of Kali Puja, they actually get a Purnabhishekta Tantric to come and do the puja, because that was what specifically Vivekananda wanted. And he was even keen on giving a bali, just that Ma Sharada, the consort of Sri Ramakrishna, was, she did not want a Pashu bali to happen. She wanted a token bali of vegetable, which is also allowed in Tantra too. So Vivekananda's, here is a man at the younger age, he's like, all Tantra is nonsense and everything, only Vedanta, only Atman, there's that. The day in the year which is about to weave his body, and something that is already aware of at least 3 to 4 years before that. He mentions in Egypt he is going, and he mentions that he sees a vision that on certain date, this particular date is going to expire, leave his body, and he comes back hurriedly to India. Here he's initiating Durga Puja, he's initiating Kali Puja, not just a Puranic method of Kali Puja. He's saying it has to be as per the Tantras, whatever is written in the text. Usi hisab se hona chahiye. The last temple, one of the last temple visits he does with his mother, he takes his mother along, is to the Kamakhya temple. Okay. After that, he stays in Belur Math and etc. So there is a very good case to say that perhaps that had he lived another few decades, he might have had certain rethinking on some of the positions he had, specifically with respect to things like Tantra. That's all.
Yeah. So I think the question then about critical mass, I think one of the questions is that Vivekananda, constantly spoke about a critical mass of Hindus you needed to get up, or critical mass of Indians, and all of that. But we don't seem to be able to, we have never been able to do that, right? I mean, every time we have tried to build some sort of mass, there is some issue that crops up or something that comes up. We've never been able to. For example, either either we get aligned to a political party,
yeah,
where for the political party, the politics is more important than the Dharma. We are just cannon fodder that they use for their own. Or we look at one great leader whom we'll look up to and say, okay, he's a great savior, and you realize that leader is is like is
feet of clay.
Yeah, feet of clay. So why is this? Why? So what is wrong with us? So where are we going wrong? I mean, why do we consistently end up screwing ourselves?
If I may, quickly, 2 minutes.
Yes, sure.
Okay. The way I look at it, this is valid. But the first problem is that the structure of Hinduism itself is very different from the other religions. Ours is various layers of individualization is there. So there is the individualization of the Upasaka, then the individualization that comes in through caste, individualization that comes in through Sampradaya. So I belong to this Sampradaya, I like this Sampradaya, you belong to that Sampradaya, you like that Sampradaya. Okay, something like that. So basically the idea was, it's like, if I just give a very superficial sort of analogy, it's like you see this Indian classical music.
Just intervene, Rajarshi. I think if you take the previous two questions first, then it will be a natural flow to the answer to this question. Because there I had asked, despite being in one section of the Bengali Hindu population, being so ritualistic, yet they are socially or communally deracinated, which you just spoke about very briefly with a passing mention, that there is too much of Western influence and all that. Now, how do you reconcile with this disconnect? That is, on the one hand, you are very religious.
Did we lose?
Did we lose Surajit?
Yeah, I think we did. I think the specific question is that while We lost a little bit of it. Surajit. I mean,
Yeah, there was an internet this thing.
So you
Okay.
froze, but yeah,
I-
but I think
okay.
you would want to
Very quickly I'll repeat it. If you look at Bengali society, a section of it is religiously very dedicated. At the same time, the same group, not a different group, is politically chalta hai, chalne do, like that, or whichever
Anti-Hindu.
way. Yes, quite deracinated. So how do you reconcile between this, religious enlightenment on the one hand and complete, insulation from a community feeling, and from
Yeah.
that you.
Yeah. I think we.
Yeah, so I think you got the question, right? The
Yeah,
community.
I got the gist of it.
Community is deracinated.
So it comes to the same thing that I was trying to say, that Hinduism in its own, Sanatana Dharma in its own development had never been a very system that, that's gathered towards, it's more individualistic, and there are layers of individualization. Individualization at the level of the deities you are worshipping, individualization at the level of the sampradayas. So there is a strong collection of various individual elements coming together. The binding factor, though, is that you rever the land, the geography of the land, and the deities are connected to the land. So that is the important aspect. But from that perspective, eventually, which now I don't want to go too much into the history and politics of it, but from the time of the last colonization, which was the British, and the time they left till now, so it has been a consistent effort to project into the masses that, okay, your religion is a private affair, and when it comes to politics, you can do whatever you want, doesn't matter, whichever is convenient for you. So that is the most, that ends up with the most hilarious of situations, where you'll find people who are officially Marxists and communists and this and that, but no problem doing Saraswati Puja at home and going to the Durga Puja. So it is kind of schizophrenic society that has been created among the Hindus, a large section of Hindus, and in Eastern India I find that more. It's like my practice is my practice, but otherwise I don't care about what my politics is. I don't even care that if my politics is eventually going to cause harm to the practice that I'm doing right now, because anyway I will not be alive so long when that situation transpires. So it's a very weird kind of situation that has developed. And in this, let me say that one of the, if we look at historically last 500-600 years, those areas where we were able to resist the invaders, we also saw certain new forms of dharma that came up. Specifically, the later Vaishnava, the manifestations of dharma, where a very key element was congregation. Whether you are coming together and doing kirtana, whether you are going from place to place, nagar kirtana you are doing, or this or that, the idea of congregating people, getting large masses of people to come together and doing a practice, regardless whether the practice is very evolved or not. So the initial stages of dharma, we were too much into the, we need to do them top level practice. You have to go straight to Himalayas. You can't stop below that. So that idea is that didn't really pan out too well historically for us, to be honest. Till 8th, 9th century, we were debating beautiful debates, lovely if you read them. Okay, and except for having a weapon, each of the debaters were experts and completely decimating the other opponent in every possible way. Fantastic thing.
Choicest of insults.
Choicest ways. Okay, and that too, that is apart from the actual theological aspect. Oh, that is like super. Whether we have this phrase in Bengali, whether the oil is sticking to the jar or the jar is sticking to the oil. You can keep debating that for 1000 years. Okay, so like that, it is going on. Suddenly, this group of barbarians come from somewhere and flat, all gone. Okay, all debates over. So, in that context, if you see very rationally, one of the typical features of all Abrahamic religions is that they place a lot of stress on congregation. Whether the practice has merit or not, that is irrelevant. But congregating people together under one banner, whatever it may be, and then using that force to your advantage eventually. That is the one thing that the later Vaishnavas did in their own way. Whether in the north it was the Ramanandi Sampradayas, they gathered all people from everywhere and tried to form some degree of resistance. Even in West, we had, the Varkari Sampradaya, again a Vaishnava Sampradaya. So this, I believe, was a very, not just was, even today is a very crucial factor. Now, how can we again get into this congregational mode? I don't know. I have no idea. But what I feel is that whichever it is not, which aspect of Dharma is made more important or not, what is most important is that there has to be at the mass level, there has to be a congregational attitude towards the Hindu. Among the Hindus, you gather together, you practice your religion, you practice it publicly. You go ahead, you do, if you take a, you have to take the Utsava Murti, you have to do a Kirtan, you have to do this, whichever is your deity, doesn't matter. So be very public, be very vocal about your religion, and you keep doing that for certain decades, then you develop a strong bonding. The bonding is much more than a theoretical bonding. Theoretical bonding will create all these schizophrenic systems where I am a very good Hindu in my home, but outside I'm a follower of Marx and Lenin, and I will follow whatever anti-Hindu policy whoever sets in place, and I have no problem with that. So that kind of weird, peculiar schizophrenia at least will be saved from if we follow more of congregational religion. And right now, somebody may say that, okay, in Bengal, there is a congregational aspect in the Durga Puja. But that is once a year, not that. I am talking about something much more frequent and much more regular. And this is where I'm not a Vaishnava, but this is one aspect of the Vaishnavism, later Vaishnavism, which I really appreciate. So get together and take the name of the deity. Baki aur zyada kuch nahi karna hai. You don't have to do too much of, sit in the asana and I will do 10 nyasas and then I will do light this and do that and then the mantra will start. So that is the individual process. That's fine. But there has to be a collective process, something to gather together. Number one. Number two is that for any kind of congregational practice to start properly among the Hindus, there has to be first a leader. We lack a leader. Because we lack leaders, so we go after political leaders. This person will do, that person will do. It doesn't work that way. Political leader also, even the best political leader also, the moment you put that person into the political system, end result will be the same. There is nobody's going to come out a saint out of the political system. It is the way it is. We need a spiritual leader. Somebody who can gather people around, who can take up these issues, and also not just take up these issues. So the few religious leaders that we have, and I'm not taking any names here, some of the Hindu community people, we revere them. What they tend to do eventually, unfortunately, is that they enter more into the political statements, political posturing. You have to do gather together for this and that, and completely shun the religious aspect. Not completely shun, but so downplay the religious aspect. My point is that there should be at least some leaders who gather people together under the religious umbrella, and then use that also for bringing about, if there's a political cause that helps Hindus, something like that. So that's just a theoretical thing that I have in mind. But
public display of this one, I think that
religion.
The public display of religion is crucial. You
Absolutely
see how
crucial.
You see how the other side, particularly Muslims, they the namaz in public, or any of these things are primarily attempts at public display of awe and kind of
domination of public
domination
space.
of the public space. And the public space, when you dominate the public space, you tend to start to control the narrative also.
And then when someone succeeds partially in doing what Rajarshi is suggesting, there is also this political issue of sudden defamation, as it happened in the case of Sadhguru. So I think being a Guru, Rohit ji may take that question. How do you deal with this obvious thing that will follow? He was leading the free temple movement in a way. And we suddenly see complete silence on that front.
I don't know if what I'm going to say will be palatable, but we as a culture have started respecting political leaders more than our religious teachers. All our emotional investment, our obedience is now to netas, not to gurus. So how this happened, I have no idea. I remember Surajit a few months back said that if you keep your religion out of your voting pattern and out of your public life, in Kerala and in Bengal, we both see that. The people are personally very devout, but they go out and they vote Marxist. And they, they support all kinds of religious-based, theological-based mindsets. they support that, So I do not know, but I do know that somewhere we have the emotional draw, the emotional magnetism is no longer towards the religious leaders, it is towards the political leaders. And why that should be so, I do not know, because I completely agree with Rajarshi that the system will corrupt the person. Once you enter into the political system will corrupt the person. Lord Acton's famous dictum, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. We all know that, but he had something else to say. He said, all great men are bad. That is the full quotation.
Okay.
Power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. All great men are bad.
Most bad men also
what
end up being
happened,
great.
I see, is that the reverence that used to go towards, let's take the case of Sadhguru. It's not like he doesn't get reverence or anything, but, the very fact that somebody is trying to raise a specifically spiritual issue caused a lot of alarm in the larger polity. And, it's not like we don't have enemies within. The enemies within joined hands with the enemies without. And the entire movement was derailed. In a sense, perhaps it is better that for something as significant, as important as freeing temples, we don't have a specific figurehead to be targeted and that it becomes diffused. But in the sense of not having a communitarian feeling, I really do not know what to do about it. Because we do have in South India, we have Utsavams, we have the whole cycle of Utsavam. If you're connected, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we are now fragmented. You see, our identity as part of a community used to be from our place of residence. We have the village, we have the temple, we are part of the routine of the festivals, and it was normal and natural. And now we are all fragmented, we are spread across, we are living in different parts of the country, we have no organic connection to the land or to the people, and we do not have a religion which creates community gathering. We simply do not have that kind of religion. So this is something that needs to be worked at. How it is to be done, I do not know, but I can tell you that this catastrophe of taking your spiritual instruction from political leaders is probably the greatest wrong turn that we have made in the last 100 years. And every time it ends in a catastrophe, and no problem, we'll find somebody else to ego invest in, So I do not know how, and unless are our gurus not worth or respect anymore? I mean, I'm openly asking that question. Why is it that we do not respect the wisdom? The idea was that the gurus would advise the netas. Ab to ulta ho gaya na.
I think the issue, I think the one issue that's perhaps answers that is one thing. Obviously, what you're saying is that the Hindus have ceded the cultural space to the politicals, and the moment
they ceded the spiritual, they ceded spiritual authority,
spiritual authority also.
Not to religious leaders but to political leaders. This is insane.
Has it got to do with the fact that of all the religions that are current in India, it's only the Hindu religion that is governed by secular laws? Is that perhaps the reason?
That's of course a very major part of it. There's a major part of it, and then the deracination goes hand in hand with the most important concept. I say something snarky that goes viral, and I say something very important like characterological evil. Something is wrong because it exists, and that's how the wokery and the the left and all, they look at Hindu Dharma as being, it should not exist.
It's not exist. Yeah.
It must be wiped out, and the tragedy is that people on our side also buy into all those atrocity narratives, equality narratives, all those kind of things. So there is a significant deracination of the brain, and the word that he used was brilliant, schizophrenia, that you are devout at home and then you step out and you become an atheist. I mean, what is going on here? But the larger problem is that the centrality of Dharma is not central in our lives. Maybe in the people here on the podcast, it is central to our lives, but to the lives of the larger people, Dharma is not central. This might not be a very pleasant thing to hear.
There is one glorious exception to, this thing where a religious congregation turns effective politically is in the case of Shabarimala. where the people, the devotees of Ayyappa, got together and they made the union government as well as the state government bend.
That is because, Surajit,
yes.
every Mallu house would send somebody to Shabarimala. It was a regular part of the individual household.
Right.
So everybody felt personally attacked.
So till the time, in the absence of a guru of that caliber who would transform a religious congregation into a political force. Political force does not mean a political party. Now, that thing, that should work. There should be, a sect, a belief system that is so invested in the core of the faith that if you try to hurt any aspect of it, there will be a severe backlash.
that has to work. It's rather sad that we are having this conversation itself. Should not our dharma be the most valuable thing anyway?
Right.
And in fact, here, just sorry to interject, a very crucial point you made there regarding the Sabarimala case. You say that every household in Kerala, every Hindu household, at least it said somebody at some point to the shrine to follow the vrata, right?
Correct.
So this is the whole point. The reason why you do not see it in other places is that, unfortunately, and for various multiple reasons, the whole generation, right from the time of independence till at least, I don't know, maybe 80s, 1980s or something, the whole generation was brought up with this idea that religion is, okay, it is there, it chalta rahega, wo pehle bhi tha, aaj bhi hai, kal bhi rahega. First, let me just get the degrees and let me just get the right job and let me just land up here and there. And so Dharma was secondary, to be very honest. Religion was considered as a very secondary pursuit. And perhaps if you don't have anything else to do, then only you turn religious. Some kind of a variation of this idea was very mass propagated among Hindus by Hindus. And it started from homes. It started right from homes. So by the time you're 18 and 20, for you, it is like a very, it's like, and by the time you're 40s, you'll feel allergic. Okay, why are people suddenly turning religious? Itna kya religion mein kya hai? Main to kabhi nahi kya. So that thing comes up. So there is a whole few generations that have gone through this kind of, mass schizophrenic processing. And un log se to hoga hi nahi.
And what has really affected our people is this constant hammering of the secular lesson. तुम जो भी हो, हिंदू हो, मुसलमान हो, अपने घर पे हो. Now they do not realize that a Muslim is a Muslim inside a mosque as well as inside a voting booth.
Inside a voting booth and in the public spaces.
Everywhere he is just a Muslim and nothing else.
And to just give a personal example for that resonates with what Rajarshi was saying. I was sharing with them that I used to go to the Ramakrishna Mutt frequently, the Vivekananda ashram and all that, when I was still at school because I got influenced. The neighbors used to tell my mother, be very careful, he keeps going to the ashram regularly. He might become Ramesh Ananda. I mean, that's what they told me. They used to tell my mother.
Hey, Baba, my family panicked because they saw me reading the Bhagavad-Gita when I was 16. Oh my God, he'll become a sannyasi. And I'm like, I have no intention of becoming a sannyasi. I had very good self-awareness even then. But how does reading the Gita translate into what went wrong with the culture? That reading the Gita means automatically sannyasi lene wala hai. I mean, cannot the Gita be valued for its psychological insights, for its spiritual insights? Does it mean that it is only for sannyasis? This is where did we end up with these absurd notions? It's of course deracination, wrong education, those kind of things. But even for that, I agree with Rajarshi that you need to see an example, you need to see an exemplar. You need to see. Now I'll tell you something that really disheartens me very much, and that is people keep writing to me and saying we've never seen an English speaking guru who is so proud of being Hindu. And my heart sinks, when I hear that you're the first guy we've seen, and not just from India, from abroad. People from the West tell me that, Hindu gurus over there are too nice, and you're the first guy we know who just says the truth as it should be said. So now we have a set of people. We have said, we all know, we all stand for Dharma first. I suppose we have to become the examples for a while until we get a vibhuti of some sort to come. And अब साधारण विभूति से काम नहीं चलेगा, छत्रपति शिवाजी महाराज जैसा विभूति का, बिकॉज पानी नाक तक आ गया है,
एकदम एकदम
पानी नाक तक आ गया है.
One thing which I find problematic in the way our society by and large thinks is this king-like conception of inheritance. Every family thinks that our legacy needs to be carried forward, and therefore if one son or one daughter has a religious bent of mind, तो हमारे legacy का क्या होगा, हमारे बाद क्या होगा?
आपके legacy से वैसे भी तो हम इस हाल में हैं यार, तो वो legacy
this is so terrible, and especially if you are the only child of your parents, it's even worse, because then the parents have no other sibling of yours to look up to. अच्छा ये इसके हमारे बाद ये हमारे property का देखभाल करेगा. So if he becomes sannyasi, then it's gone. That's the ridiculous idea. That
you can see the logic in that, but your larger question is, what do we do as gurus? What do we do as spiritual figures?
Yes.
And the only thing I can see is that you just set the example. You just set the example, and then one day there will be an organic tipping point, hopefully. And it had better come soon, because the matters are much more dangerous and much more dire than we have any conception of.
Because the other tipping point is already, we are almost close to it. We've not had a census since 2011.
They know very well what the figures are. That's why they don't want to have the census and formalize it.
Because the demographic tipping point, I think we've seen it play. Yeah, we've seen it play out in quite a few states already.
Yeah.
And we're going to see
it. No, but it's a very fixed. No. The question is of utmost importance, because it is a question of survival, which people don't seem to understand.
And
people
not
don't
just
seem to understand that it's a question of physical survival. If you don't come out and be a Hindu in all aspects of your life, not just at home in front of your puja stand.
No, one of the funniest statements, because there is no cure for this, and I'm sure all of you might have heard this. One of the funniest statements that only I hear from Hindus only, that some variation of this, or the exact statement something like this, that religion, Hindu Muslim अपने जगह पे सबसे ऊपर है humanity. इसका कोई मतलब नहीं है. मैं सुन के मैं पागल हो जाऊंगा. ये क्या मतलब है इसका? Seriously,
humanity above all. Humanity above all. और मैं बोलता हूँ, you will anyway still burn those आग में.
You will find it
only in the fires of hell.
No,
तुम्हारा humanity से कोई मतलब नहीं.
Statement.
This is exactly
meaningless statement. Humanity, if it was so, forget religion for the moment, if humanity was so good, you would not even need a single secular law. You can take the CRPC and throw it into the ocean. If humanity has the ability to self-regulate things and take itself into a higher status, you would not need law, you would not need dharma, you would not need religion, you would need nothing. In fact, if you just let humans be, then you'll end up completely, each one will become a Hitler. Each one will completely obliterate everybody else. कुछ नहीं humanity. ये इतना bogus statement.
They may be, and it's very interesting because Rajarshi brings up humanity. In today's article, our favorite whipping boy, TMK, Shri Guru came up with with the expansion of the TMK as well recently. So TM Krishna talks about how he's written a big article on the hijab controversy, and he says humanity above everything else.
कोई मतलब I every time I hear it, I'm like, what is this?
Yes, but these statements, Sarvagarma Vadapav, humanity is above all, these are meant to render Hindus defenseless.
Yes,
important.
Yes.
Let us be very blunt about it.
Yes,
absolutely.
The entire educational system, the entire left liberal mindset is that Hindus must be defenseless. Hindus must lose the capacity to resist. Hindus must lose the ability to resist. And now people like us are waking up and, we are pushing back hard against it. But then you have TMK type jokers, like circus clowns who have completely internalized that mindset.
If I may attempt an answer, I would suggest that we give them a completely rational answer, that no matter what shit you believe in, you will remain Homo sapiens. So humanity is never under threat. You are not going to change into arthropoda or a unicellular organism. it
Not-
is
not-
your
yeah,
community
absolutely.
which is under
लेकिन ये
threat.
above all का क्या मतलब है? Above what?
Above all, seriously.
Above Homo erectus.
Above
you
what?
you
Above
need to
Homo
worry
erectus.
about something that is on the verge of extinction or which is
Yeah, and
endangered. Humanity is
such a
never
lot of
endangered. You will remain human
spiritual
being.
arrogance in that, कि
Yes.
I am at such an exalted level of consciousness कि अब मेरे को बस
Yes, yes.
like I find this amongst people who will talk about the story of Adi Shankara and the Chandala, and then they will criticize the student they are teaching that story to because that person married out of caste. So you can hold these completely contradictory views in your mind with no problem, with the greatest comfort.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
ये schizophrenia नहीं है तो और क्या है? I mean,
Absolutely.
quite honestly.
If
quite
we
honestly.
also
And to bring it
had
back to Vivekananda, after everything that he said, if you can still find a secular liberal in him, I mean, I am in awe of the ability of the
Seriously.
mind to delude oneself,
right.
I have one question for Surajit. Does YouTube shut you off after 3 hours? I don't know. I read somewhere that is a...
It could be, but like, if it shuts you off, it shuts you off.
I haven't studied that. Yeah. But no,
No,
I
all
wanted to add.
No, all those
I
people
wanted
watching
to
there will
add,
get...
I wanted to add to
knocked
what Rohit ji and Rajarshi was saying, that in a very small sample of what this humanity shit leads us to is the argument of Kashmiriyat. If we had Ashish Dhar with us,
No,
he would say how it worked out in Kashmir.
I might as well reveal it. I'm going to have him on the next talk. That is next weekend. I'm probably going to have Ashish on there.
Do not fall for any slogan which renders you ineffective or powerless.
Because you will never find the statement coming from somebody who goes to the the madrasa, or somebody who's going to the church. Yes, sir. Humanity वाला nonsense नहीं आता है. और इसका तो मतलब भी नहीं समझ में आया मुझे अभी तक.
नहीं, और उनके लोग कुछ गड़बड़ करते हैं तो they never say we are ashamed of our religion.
Yeah. This is
Who's the other bunch of jokers who do that?
No,
Flower people.
Yes. I just if I have to say that this what this is very clearly demonstrating is every touch point of interface either with the political entity or with any other even business corporate entity or anything where religion comes into picture, it should be regarded as a transaction and there is a trade-off that is inherent to that transaction. And what we are going to lose in the process and what we are gaining in the process, this critical thinking ability is a totally zilch level for us. We are not even trained to think that there is a transaction that's happening and a trade-off that's happening and we are about to lose every inch of it every single time this happens. So I think this again comes to what Shri Aurobindo also said, lack of critical thinking at a colossal...
Lack of thought power.
Yeah, a lot of lack of thought power, it's such, and now it's like a pandemic, for us. So...
Yeah, but the internalization of that Hindu Dharma is a characterological evil. That is the greatest problem I'm seeing, that it is wrong because it exists.
Absolutely.
Any aspect of it, hamla karo, attack it, go at it from all directions like hyenas, I mean, I get tired sometimes. How long can we keep being in response, I'm reactive state, we are always in a reactive state. When are we going to control the whole situation? We are just, somebody says something, idhar se ek eruption, somebody says something, udhar se ek eruption. That won't do. Let us be very clear about it. कोई डरता नहीं है हमसे, किसी को रेस्पेक्ट नहीं है हमारे. When people hear the Hindus are coming, their hair should turn white.
So this is absolutely, किसी कोई डरता नहीं है, but contrary behavior that we sometimes project as Vishwaguru and confidently show something exactly opposite to that, we are already ruling something.
ये Vishwaguru जो है ना, it is like the 21st century equivalent of the old, on Surajit Swift News, he had one discussion with the whole full Bengali panel, and one young fellow said, what Bengal thinks today, India thinks tomorrow. The rest of them all jumped on him and said, this statement, all Bengalis, they said, this statement should never be articulated in public. One person definitely said that. और ये जो विश्वगुरु है ना, I'm the oldest person probably on this panel. I'm 57. From the time I have started reading papers and magazines, I can tell you, India the next superpower, question mark. India will definitely be the next superpower. Every 3 to 5 years, ये नाटक, ये मैंने पूरा लाइफ माला जाप रहा हूँ मैं इंडिया का सुपर पावर और विश्व गुरु बनने का. ये कभी होने वाला नहीं है. We are an underdeveloped, non-industrialized third world society, and first realize reality where you are. You know, ये आसमानी थाली पुलाव पकाने में यहाँ माहिर हैं. You know, people are just brilliant at that. Nothing of that sort is going to happen. Just because you have a nuclear bomb doesn't make you a superpower.
And on top
North
of that,
Korea also has a nuclear bomb.
And on top of that, एक हाथ में आसमानी किताब और दूसरे हाथ में लैपटॉप.
Well, I have actually now come to the point where I don't have any real rancor against other people, because the problem is with us.
Right.
If we
Yeah,
were
just because they are successful, उसका मतलब थोड़ी.
if we were firm, if we were strong, if we had our mind clear, ये सब नाटक ही नहीं होता है ना. You know, but Surajit, I really cannot answer your question when you said what should the gurus do, because you know the gurus seem to have, in a sense, been intimidated by the Indian state.
Yes.
No, but I would like to say that it is here that that you know what Shri Guru just now said. So create a bunch of, like, be completely comfortable in your skin. If I believe that if Swami Vivekananda, bringing it back to him, was alive today, first of all, तो वो खुद ही अपने, you know, some of the ideas he would have rejected, and he would have been far more categorical in his criticism of things, and he would have been exactly who he is. Who he is in his own skin. So that is the whole point. There is, you know, this peculiar thing. I mean, this is a mindset. It is not about one statement about humanity above all. So that's a reflection of the disease. I find this very peculiar mindset in a group of say 5 to 10 people, say 8, 9 of them, or 10 people, 9 of them are Hindus, and one from another religion they're sitting, and there's some discussion on religion or something going on. You will find this very, very peculiar habit that all 9 will be hell-bent on making sure that the feelings of that one is not hurt.
Yeah, Conrad also said the same thing. Conrad also said the same thing. If there are 100 people in a room and 99 are Hindus and one is non-Hindu, the 99 people get ready, making the non-Hindu comfortable.
Yes. It's a peculiar mindset.
नहीं होना चाहिए.
किसी को hurt नहीं होना चाहिए. Exactly.
किसी को hurt नहीं होना चाहिए. And I'm like, hurt करो अभी.
And that,
हम तो वैसे भी दोजख के आग में जलने वाले हैं ना.
कह के लेंगे.
Hellfire, no?
that is what.
No matter how comfortable we make them, if you ask them, will I go to hell or not, they will say.
Yeah.
Definitely hell.
They will say, you will go to hell.
And not just hell, you'll land in that fire also.
Yeah, eternal barbecue, you know, you'll be eternally barbecue.
Okay, I think there is one question from the questionnaire that we did not take, that was on caste. Question number 3.
Question number 3.
Vivekananda on caste. I think Rohitji will be better.
And the question was further qualified to ask, have we failed in not living up to
I think
Vivekananda's...
I did address it, no? When we had our talk, did I not address it?
You addressed that.
Rajarshi, you had some ideas on this. I like Rajarshri's one statement, caste is against my religion. I also repeat it all the time. I don't believe in the caste because it is against my religion. वो भी मैं repeat करता. My religion is integral yoga. एकदम minority और minorities का religion है.
इतना minority है कि even that, you know, with no disrespect to the cult of Shri Aurobindo surviving, वो भी आपको side कर देगा.
नहीं वो तो बाप रे. As Vivekananda once said, this is an interesting quotation of Swami Vivekananda. May God bless them en masse and save them from me individually. Save me from them individually.
Yeah.
Caste mein, but what is this obsession with caste? 1 minute, Rashi, please. Just why does every discussion on spirituality in India come back to this one kida? Can we not have?
Yeah, I have a theory on this, that perhaps coming back to a previous point that I was making, that for a large, for many decades, the kind of upbringing that Hindu society had was where dharma was perhaps the fifth or the sixth important thing in the list of things that are important in life. उसमें सबसे पहले you have a good degree, you have money, you have this, that, etc. You go abroad, वो सब life settle हो जाएगा तुम्हारा. बाकी समय मिले तो थोड़ा बहुत कर लेना कुछ, हाँ वैसा टाइप का. In this, however, if you ask any of the people of that mindset, which would be perhaps in their, most of them in their 40 and above right now, I've seen many of them, especially in North India. When you ask them that, okay, you did all this, you voted for parties that were now all parties are more or less anti-Hindu, some are more than others. Okay, so in that situation, you had no issues in, voting an anti-Hindu party or some political move that was anti-Hindu. So how do you reconcile this problem? So in their mind, this is not a problem at all. I am proud Hindu. I said, how are you a proud Hindu? Because I follow the mandated by my caste. So there is a certain element, I'm not saying everybody is like this, but there is a large population of section of Hinduism where it was believed that, okay, spirituality is also, agar ho gaya kisi ka ek aad nikal gaya spiritual to achhi baat hai, but basically you just follow the, the rules and the systems that are put in place by the caste that has been traditionally handed down, that automatically makes you a Hindu, and you are free to do whatever else you want. You can vote for anybody, you can even vote for, the Muslim parties if that suits your politics, no problem. Till the time you're following your caste rules, and caste rules enjoin certain collective festivals once in a while, a little bit of that. So this, I believe, has been a hindrance. There is no denying it. Whatever good it may have been at some point of time, and I'm not going into that. More or less, I am personally very categorical and clear about this thing, that we are at that stage right now where caste is more, no problem following it individually, but if you make that as the most important thing, there is definitely you are ending up, you will end up, you cannot then complain that why are Muslims and why are others getting it so high, why they have an upper hand, why you don't have a lower hand. You sit in the branch, you want to cut the same branch, then when you fall down, you say, why did I fall down? Then you are a stupid idiot. That's it.
One problem that, one cause of this problem is viewing Swami Vivekananda as pro-caste or anti-caste. He was neither. He dealt with the issue of caste, which I find very disturbing, even in India. That is, what Swami Vivekananda says is also measured at the, in the backdrop of the fact that he was a Kayastha, that Narendra Datta was a Kayastha. Now, if a Brahmin had said that, would it have more validity? That is a question. And why would that have more validity? And in the modern times, when we see people speaking for the preservation of the caste system, we see most intellectuals at least, they are Brahmins who are seeing a virtue in the caste system. And therefore, the question arises, there are certain cardinal principles that work internationally. For instance, whether something is offensive or not is to be determined by the offended and not by the offender. So if let's say a member of the scheduled caste believes that the caste system offends him, you cannot say, you cannot keep counting the benefits of the caste system before him, because he is the offended party there. The offending party does not have the right to, count the benefits of it. So it's like caste. If a party believes that it has got a raw deal from it, and if that party says that, well, caste should continue, it is more valid than a privileged class saying it should continue. The same thing stands in case of Swami Vivekananda. So should his sayings be tempered in view of the fact that he was not born a Brahmin? That is a very wrong thing. That is a very wrong thing. It should not be viewed in that light. Yeah.
I think in terms of questions, we seem to have covered in the sense.
I think
not exactly.
let's,
yeah.
I think that
Ramesh,
caste is
it's
actually
3
very
hours.
complicated.
3 hours. Yeah, 3 hours.
Yeah, it's 3 hours. I don't think if we keep going, then nobody will view the video at all.
Yeah.
If we can come back later, I am quite willing to come back later and just answer the question.
No,
Ask
I
the
think
question, I'll answer. Ask the
No,
question, I'll answer.
no,
Ask the
I think
question,
what has happened is we seem to have covered all of the questions, though not
Oh, great.
in the exact order or in
Then
the
that's
sense
great.
that we
Yeah.
wanted. In that sense,
No,
I
but
think
3 hours is more or less the limit, I think.
3 hours.
Mm.
3 hours is more or less the limit.
And till we become Joe Rogan, I think we can't go to 4 hours. And even he is now not.
We will make Surajit the Joe Rogan of India. I've told him to do it also.
Yeah, he should become the.
I've told him to do it also. Have a podcast, Surajit, because he
Yes.
knows so much about so many things.
Right.
That
Thank you.
we make him
Yes, let me plan it out. And
Surajit Dasgupta experience.
SD experience or something.
Powerful Surajit Dasgupta,
Yeah,
powerful
like-
SDE.
Yeah, like JRE, it can be SDE. Then.
Yeah, powerful SDE. Is that it? Is that any
I think
Yeah, anything else?
any last things anybody would like to say, and we can then close it?
let's check the
so.
chat.
Only
box.
last thing I would like to say, coming back to Swami Vivekananda specifically, is that my experience has few. There are few specific spiritual figures, and both of them, both Sri Aurobindo and Swami Vivekananda, I have seen at various points, and this is not just a statement of belief, good faith, and aspirational statement, but let's say that the beings who incarnated as these two forces, these two personalities, they're still highly active in India, in their own way, and it is not impossible to connect to them. I have seen various strange occurrences happening in people who have faith. Even with that itself would be a very vast topic in discussion. But yeah, these two figures, and usme se bhi even Swami Vivekananda is even more, in remotest of places across India where they have no access to anything else, still there is this strong element of devotion to Swami Vivekananda. They may or may not know Ramakrishna. Everybody may not know full about Ramakrishna. Vivekananda, there is this strong, there's this willingness, this acceptance, and this strong Shraddha, the element of Shraddha on him. And I do believe that the spirit of Vivekananda is still very much active and will remain so until perhaps, hopefully, India and Dharma reaches a more stable physical footing in this land.
One thing I see very praiseworthy in the Ramakrishna mission is that the founder is not worshipped. And this is why it is not a cult. This is worth praising. You would get into any center of Ramakrishna mission and you would see the image of Ramakrishna separated from that of Kali, Ramakrishna and Ma. So Sharada Ma. So this is something remarkable. He did not mean to initiate a cult, and it did not reduce to being a cult, which is praiseworthy.
And
Yeah,
there is. Sorry.
Yeah.
Thoughts just pop up when I heard Surajit Da. The other interesting thing I believe that so before when he laid down the foundation of the Ramakrishna Math, Swami Vivekananda made a prediction, and by the way, he was very good in making the spontaneous predictions, and they would more or less always turn out right. He, for example, he had predicted that when on the specific date, he's going to die and things like that. So he said that Ramakrishna mission is going to survive till 1500 years, and then it will get destroyed. It will be finished. In order that, and this is the beauty of this man, which I find very interesting. So here is a man with definitely a developed intellectual ability, a man with very high spiritual caliber, and a man with exceptional executive ability. The Kriya Shakti is extremely powerful in him. So what he does, he calls all the brother disciples, everybody, and says, okay, we are going to do this. Now you tell me what suggestions you have. How do I go about this, etc. So everybody gives a suggestion. This should be the mart, and this is how it should be structured. Here's all that. Then he writes down his own rules, step by step, from beginning till end. How it is going to be financially viable, what food they should eat, how many years they should remain a brahmachari. Pura pura, it's like he writes down the constitution of the whole organization. One step you cannot go out of that. He mentions that anybody who enters into the organization cannot even vote, and that they keep following. My point is that this ability to execute a thing to a degree that it survives for 1500 years or something like that, it requires a very superlative kind of soul. I mean, you'll find normally is that somebody who is highly intellectual may or may not have a spiritual component. And generally intellectuals are people who do not go into public so often. They stay away from public because thinking is a process that is best done contemplation in isolation and in a more calm environment. Here is a man who's spending his whole life running around everywhere, meeting people, giving lectures, spontaneously reacting to things, yet telling some very, very intelligent and not just intelligent things that have tremendous foresight. Like to mention a statement like this, that every Hindu is coming out is not only a man less, but an enemy more. A statement that rings so true even today. In fact, truer than perhaps it was at his time. Okay. And then forming a mission and writing down every rule of it, how it is going to run. Morning till evening, what food, etc. Basically, to end it, as Sri Ramakrishna used to say, it was a mistake, used to say that Vivekananda has 18 gunas in exaltation, and if he wants, he can take the world and just spin it around. These are the qualities he was born with. He was that, and we see a small reflection of that. Here's a man who can do all these things simultaneously without sort of doing a fair job of it, in fact, not just a fair job, a pretty decent job of it. I mean, if any of us had to do all of this together, I'm pretty certain that maybe one thing we would have been able to do well and 10 other things we would have been able to do very badly. So that was his exceptionality.
And to Surajit's point about, they're not worshipped. I think there's a lovely anecdote of Vivekananda where, he returns from the US or somewhere from the West and walks into the Mayavati ashram, which is an Advaita ashram, and then he sees, the photo of Ramakrishna being worshipped, and he takes off the photo and says, "I want at least one place where the old man's influence is not there." So that's the kind of person here. I mean, and he was also the person who says, "I am nothing without the master." His essay on his speech on Ramakrishna is probably one of the most poignant that we would ever see, and for this guru. But at the same time, he also had the viveka to discern between what was right and the purpose of that ashram versus this. Ram, anything?
No, I think that this is all perfect. I think no more additions to this wonderful.
I'll just make one final point, if I may. Please don't get your knowledge about Vivekananda and Aurobindo from discussions and social media. Please go to the original sources.
Perfect.
Please read the books. They are highly subsidized books, both the Ramakrishna Mission books as well as the Aurobindo books. Trust me, it is going to be the best investment you will ever make in your life. If you really can read Vivekananda all the way through, if you really can read the significant works of Aurobindo all the way through, all this froth and fury around what did he actually say, what did he actually mean, was he a crypto-Christian, all that would evaporate. Always go to the primary source. Always go to the primary source. So, I keep telling people, why don't you read the man? I got a set of complete works of Swami Vivekananda. They subsidized it and sold it at 150 rupees. Okay, I'm talking about the 1990s, but even then, 150 rupees for the complete works of Swami Vivekananda is like, it's free essentially. It's just a token. So, all this is very good. I'm very glad because, we had a nice panel discussion. We got into things. We had a long chat. Glorious Adda after a long time. Spiritual Adda, but still Adda. But I'm like, why don't people actually pick up the books? Instead of getting it second hand, third hand, 25th hand, and then, through parochial filters, through language filters, just go and read. And your life will transform. What Rajarshi said about the Shakti inherent in the man, even in the books you can find it.
Yes.
There are certain passages where you get electricity, So I'm like, हमारी बात छोड़ो, okay, it's very nice that people come and listen to us, but go to far greater people than us, yeah, and both of them were like, we are कीड़ा मकोड़ा in front of them. आप जाओ, उनकी बातें, look what they said, and when you speak on political matters, it is transient, it is of the time, but when you speak on spiritual matters, it is eternal.
Right.
And they still have many things to teach us, so my always tell people, original source पे जाओ भैया, original source पे जाओ. ये third and fourth and 25th hand WhatsApp University hand ऐसा नहीं चलेगा. So that's all I have to say. Go to the original guys, please. Read the original sources.
Absolutely. So it's been 3 hours and 14 minutes. And, absolutely wonderful. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I wanted to, thank everyone for having come over, and we've always wanted to do this. When you say 60 minutes and all of those things, you realize that you need to squeeze questions in. It's more like a checklist.
नहीं, 60
running
minutes
through.
में warm up ही होता है.
So this is more like the
Maybe,
kind of,
Ramesh, you could give the recording to an IT guy and
Right.
ask him to break it up into pieces. One question.
I must
and its
tell you that
answers at a time.
I must tell you that I forgot to start recording it till about the 90th minute. That's why it popped up in between.
Oh,
What we will have to do is to download from the YouTube. This one.
okay.
That will be.
Oh, so this is all gone onto YouTube only. It didn't go
Yeah.
into Zoom. Okay, wow.
No,
Vigna.
it went to YouTube via Zoom, I think. Yes.
It went to YouTube via Zoom, but the recording is
Okay.
only from the 91st minute of.